Chapter 713. Alice, Elementary Grade 2. Occupation: Leader of the Witches of Destiny. Stats: Strength, 4 Vitality, 3 Agility, 5 Spirit, 22. Occupation Skills: Perception of Destiny, Divination, Destiny Interference, Retracting the Strange Blue Light. Grimm closed his eyes tiredly and rubbed his temples. Grimm had used the AI chip's detection and scanning abilities to get a complete picture of Alice's basic stat. Of course, this was only possible after Alice suppressed her body's instincts to defend herself and counterattack. Otherwise, with Alice's identity as the leader of the Witches of Destiny, there were not many people in this world who could detect her from a distance. So, do you have any conclusions? Alice yawned and stretched herself lazily. She ignored Grimm's gaze that was filled with blue light. Everyone had their own secrets and privacy. There was no need to be so clear about everything, or else life would be too boring. Your body is too weak. Grimm muttered in a low voice. Don't tell me your identity as a witch of destiny devours your basic stats? Apart from your spiritual force reaching 22 points, which is above the threshold of Grade 2, your other stats are still at Grade 1, and have even dropped a little. My spiritual force has reached 22 points? I thought it was only 21 points. Looks like the scepter of prophecy really suits me. Don't change the topic. Pay attention to what I'm saying. Grimm rubbed his temples even harder. Based on your body's basic data, I suspect that your special class has a certain energy-absorbing property. What do you mean? In other words, your occupation is inclined towards spiritual force, similar to most elemental magi. Furthermore, your occupation will slowly absorb other attributes to replenish your spiritual force. This will allow you to increase your spiritual force much faster than elemental magi. Alice was undoubtedly very interested in this topic. Doesn't that mean that my mental power is improving much faster than yours? This is a good thing. Don't just look at the benefits. Grimm reprimanded him in annoyance. It will also cause your strength, constitution, and agility to drop. In the end, you will be as weak as a chicken, and your body will be as fragile as a piece of paper, and your speed will be as slow as a snail. So what? Anyway, I'm a destiny witch. I just need to point out some things and do some behind-the-scenes work. I'll leave the fighting and killing to you guys. Alice still had an indifferent attitude. No, you're wrong. Grimm shook his head. The destiny witches might have tried many ways to increase their mental power. Based on the characteristics of your class, only methods that nourish your spiritual power are the most effective. Even if you use methods that train your strength and build up your physique, the effects won't be great, and there might even be some regression. That's why you've developed the bad habit of focusing only on mental strength. You mean, I made myself very clear. According to the characteristics of your class, you should formulate a more optimized and comprehensive physical fitness improvement plan. Whether it's to nourish the spirit or the body, it'll benefit your spirit. Alice could not help but be surprised. You don't tell me you want me to promote the anatomy wizard among the destiny witches? At the thought of a group of delicate destiny witches locked in a machine room, sweating and hammering their bodies, soaking in a jar of poison to temper their bodies, Alice felt the world spin and her future was bleak. Perhaps only Sophia, that big fellow, would like such a life. Grimm clearly guessed what Alice was thinking. He chuckled and said, "As long as you're willing, it's not impossible." "No, I absolutely won't agree." Alice immediately panicked. We can eat. Oh. Alright, eating was indeed a way. Oh right, other than my physical stats, is there any problem with my advancement this time? Grimm muttered to himself for a moment and could not help but feel distressed. You destiny witches have almost abandoned all defensive and combat spells, only keeping a few of your class skills. So I guess that the skills of the destiny witches must be very terrifying. Hearing this, Alice closed her eyes and sensed for a moment. After a moment, she finally opened her beautiful eyes. Before becoming a Destiny Witch, I mastered divination. After becoming the leader of the Destiny Witches, I also mastered the ability Fate Perception. This time, I only obtained a new ability, Fate Interference. It's very vague, and I'm not too sure. Oh? What's its use? It seems. Maybe. Probably. It's to change the fate of a small thing. To use this ability, I need to use 1,500 points of Fate Force. How much Fate Force do you have now? 13,511 points. How can it be so much? Grimm could not help but be surprised. I remember you saying that the genius who turned the goblin plane upside down obtained less than 4,000 points of Fate Force. Maybe it's because of this. Alice smiled mysteriously, and with a flip of her slender fingers, an exquisite card the size of a palm appeared out of thin air. The card danced in her tender white fingers, and Grimm could clearly see that the card was engraved with a strange and exquisite prophecy scepter. Beat. Strange fate amalgamation detected. Existence. Magic scepter. Sealed. What was fate? Wasn't it supposed to be vague and illusory? How could there be an energy shell that was almost solid? Grimm shook his head in distress, deeply confused by the information the A.I. chip had given him. If Alice could lend him the prophecy scepter to study for a period of time, perhaps he would be able to obtain an answer. But now, Grimm could only sigh deeply, shaking his head helplessly with a bitter smile. With his current strength, he was still unable to study such an unfathomable power. Even Alice, the leader of the Witches of Destiny, could only use it according to her instincts. However, she was most likely clueless about the essence and origin of the power of fate. Grimm was currently only at the second order, and was still at the stage of using and grasping elemental force. Only after reaching the fourth order and gaining some basic control over the laws of the plane would he be able to continue studying the power of fate. Grimm lowered his head and thought for a moment, guessing inwardly. It said that this scepter of prophecy was a semi-divine weapon bestowed by a human god of prophecy in the Fane plane. Following the fall of the god of prophecy in the war between the humans and the elven gods, the scepter of prophecy fell into the hands of outsiders. The reason you were able to obtain so much power of fate in one go might have something to do with the fall of the god of prophecy. These things are too unfathomable. Let's slowly study them in the future. Right, you just looked at my stats. What about yours and Mary's stats? Alice could not help but ask curiously. Grimm smiled and waved his hand. Fire elemental particles quickly gathered and formed lines of words in front of Alice. Grimm, mid-grade 2. Profession, Elemental Magus, Fire Specialization. Stats: Strength 11, 18, Vitality 13, 20, Agility 10, 8, Spirit 26, 29. Note: Stats after transformation are in bracket. Profession skills: Body of Fire, Balrog transformation. Acolyte: Fire Arrow, Fire Snake, Flaming Hand, Witchcraft Fireball rank 1. Lava Fireball, Meteor Shower, Fire Core Explosion, Flaming Storm, Flame Cage rank 2. Doomsday Volcano, Crimson Flame Storm, Inferno Wall, Meteor Fall. Compared to Alice's profession skills, Grimm was a Tier 2 Fire Magus with the Fire Specialization. He had grasped a lot of fire spells. Be it the support-type Flame Jet, the defense-type Lava Shield, or the offense-type Volcano of Doom, Grimm's densely packed list of skills dazzled Alice's eyes. Her petite cherry lips opened wider and wider, and it was difficult for her to close them. Mary, early grade 2. Profession: Bloodline Magus, Vampire. Stats: Strength 13, Constitution 14, Agility 26, Spirit 17. Profession skills: Embrace Acolyte, Blood Mist, Blood Bullet, Bat Transformation, Lifesteal, Blood Sense, Rank 1. Blood Contract, Blood Berserk, Blood Manipulation, Rank 2. Blood Corrosion, Blood Claw, Blood Boil. Compared to Alice, Mary's stats were practically perfect. In his previous life on Earth, She would have been a superhero on par with Wonder Woman. However, in the sorcerer world, although Mary was not at the bottom of the sorcerer world, there was still a huge gap between her and the top of the sorcerer world. The so-called top of the sorcerer world was only a Tier 4 sorcerer. However, Grimm knew very well that even a Tier 4 sorcerer who could dominate the sorcerer world was nothing compared to the great sorcerers who had left the sorcerer world. Great sorcerers who could travel freely in the void, pass through energy storms, search for suitable spaces, and plunder resources were the true core of the sorcerer world. Compared to them, the sorcerers in the sorcerer world were like a group of ants hiding in an ant's nest. Perhaps they were 1 or 2 times bigger. However, in the eyes of the great sorcerers, no matter how big an ant was, it was still an ant. It could not threaten them at all. If an ant jumped around too much, it would only take a finger to destroy it. That was why, even though he had become a Tier 2 sorcerer, Grimm still tried his best to keep a low profile. He did not want to attract the attention of those powerful beings. Chapter 7:14. Bliss arrived at the Shadow Island a month and a half later than his companions. As the ship crashed into the reefs near the shoreline, a large hole appeared on the starboard side of the ship's bow. An ear-piercing sound came from the bottom of the ship as it scraped against the sand at the bottom of the sea. The slightly fishy seawater gushed in through the hole, and the ship began to tilt. Large amounts of broken planks, wine barrels, and other junk were scattered on the surface of the sea. Bliss turned into a puff of black smoke, and flew from the deck of the ship. He crossed nearly 100 meters of the sea and landed heavily on the beach. The moment his feet touched the ground, the beach in front of him bulged silently. Dozens of muscular sand giants with blurry faces surrounded him from all directions. "Tell me your name, intruder." A cold voice came from above him. Bliss raised his head slightly. Through the shadow of his black hood, his 2 large and 2 small green eyes stared at the strange witch who was floating 20 meters above him on a flying broom. Perhaps sensing the familiar ripples of wizard power from the intruder, the pale witch on duty did not command her puppet wizard beasts to continue attacking. "Bliss, a wizard from the Crimson family. I came here with the witches of destiny." After not seeing him for a few months, the evil and cruel aura of the worm Lich Bliss had grown thicker. His body under the black robe was much more bloated than before. In a place where the pale witch could not see, the black robe was still wriggling, as if it was not a normal human body. "Bliss." The witch floating in the air took out an inspection crystal and scanned Bliss from afar. The aura she took in matched the aura stored in the crystal. "All right, your identity has been verified. You can enter the island now." "But..." The witch had just finished announcing the results of the inspection when her tone suddenly changed. "The ship you're on is registered with the Wizard's Pagoda on the Shadow Island, and is under the protection of the Pale Witches. Now, why can't I sense any signs of life on the ship?" Not far from the beach, the stranded ship was tilted to one side. There were no crew members jumping into the sea to escape, no humans crying for help. Other than the dull thuds of the waves hitting the hull of the ship, everything was eerily silent. "You know, the ship has been sailing for a little longer. I can't really control these little treasures of mine." Blitz shrugged helplessly. With a thud, a pitch-black substance fell out of his black robe and landed on the beach. It rapidly dispersed into thousands of black worms before burrowing back into his robe. "Your reason is not accepted, foreign wizard." A trace of dissatisfaction appeared on the face of the Pale Witch. "You have openly attacked the indigenous organization under the protection of the Pale Witch. You must be punished. 100 magical crystals. We will deduct 100 magical crystals from your planar earnings as punishment. 100 mana crystals? Those were only 37 mortal natives, and they weren't so-called fighters. How could they be so expensive? It's unfriendly for you to treat your allies like this." Suddenly hearing the punishment, Worm Lich Bliss immediately grumbled in dissatisfaction. Wizard, if you refuse to accept the punishment, I will have to expel you from Shadow Island on behalf of the Pale Witch. It's your choice, accept or reject. The Pale Witch on duty insisted. All right, I'll accept. How dare you guys, who are guarding the rear, treat your allies who are fighting at the front like this? I'll protest to the high-grade witches in your family. Despite his dissatisfaction, Bliss could only choose to accept the punishment. Follow it. It will bring you into the inner island. Also, your companions have already returned to Shadow Island. You will find them on the 15th level of the Wizard's Pagoda on the inner island. After the witch on duty finished speaking, she turned around and flew away on her flying broom. The sand giants surrounding Blitz also dispersed into a pile of sand. Only one sand giant remained, leading Blitz deeper into the island. After leaving the beach, the sand giants dispersed not long after, handing over the guiding task to a shadow mastiff hiding in the shadows. After passing through a small swamp, the new guiding task was handed over to a chaos whiplash. This was a mutant magical plant that resembled a man-eating flower. There was a human face on its sunflower-like flower, and two soft rattan-like tentacles extended from the middle of its 2-meter-tall stem. The tentacles were covered in terrifying thorns and sticky green liquid. The roots and tentacles under its body split into 2 strands, just like a pair of human legs, moving on the ground in a strange manner. This kind of magical plant was a wizard creation that most wizards liked to plant near their residences as sentries and guards. Not only did it have a long life force, it could also hunt for food on its own, so wizards did not have to take care of it every day. Along the way, Blitz had seen many typical wizard beasts and magical plants mentioned in the Wizard's Handbook. Under their guidance, he passed through layers of outer areas and finally entered the inner island after collecting a strange crystal that looked like an identity card. In one of the residences on the 15th level of the Wizard's Pagoda, Blitz met his master, the great master who had abandoned him on the Callan continent, the level 2 fire wizard Grimm. Grimm was obviously very happy to see the insect lich Blitz return. After the customary welcome, Grimm tossed a knowledge crystal into Blitz's arms. Everything you've done in the Callan continent was not bad. As a reward for your bravery, this knowledge crystal is yours. This is my personal reward. As for your share as a magus of the family, you can get it from Chef. Alright, if you have nothing else to do, take a good rest on the Shadow Island. I still have a spell experiment that I need to complete immediately. As if racing against time to complete the welcome ceremony, Grimm turned into a ball of flames and disappeared from the room. In the Magus world, even within the same Magus family, there was no such thing as a close relationship between mortals. Everything was based on benefits. It was precisely because the Crimson family could provide them with benefits and knowledge, as well as guide them in their rapid growth, that the ambitious Magi were willing to serve under Grimm. As Grimm's student, Merrill might have some personal feelings for the Crimson family, but the rest of the Magi from the other families were mostly attracted by the benefits and knowledge. That was why the conversations and interactions between Magi were so cold and direct. Knowledge crystal? The insect lich Blitz's complicated eyes flickered with suspicion. He casually weighed it in his hand, then tossed the knowledge crystal into the lotus petal-like mouth of the insect, and slid it down its thick neck into its stomach. Oh, it's the poison witchcraft and related knowledge that poison centipede Ender had sorted out. He had asked her for these many times, and she had never spilled the beans. Why was she so generous this time? However, he quickly tossed this doubt to the back of his mind. With this poison witchcraft, he would have a new direction in refining and controlling the swarm of insects. In the future, the large swarm of insects he could control would probably be called the scourge beetles. As he fantasized, Blitz quickly walked out of Grimm's residence. Just this knowledge crystal, that was worth tens of thousands of magic crystals, was enough to dispel his previous complaints about being abandoned. He focused all his attention on gathering the necessary poisonous resources and finding suitable ritual items. The Ice Maiden Shefu resided on the 7th level of the Wizard's Pagoda. After finding her and talking to her, Bliss found out what had happened in the family during this period of time. The floating battleship destroyed. Poison centipede ender killed in battle. Alice successfully advanced to level 2. Each and every one of these incidents made Bliss tremble with fear. For some reason, he felt that it was not so unacceptable to fight alone in the midst of an enemy's encirclement. Even though they were in the absolute safety of the Shadow Island, the 2 level 1 magi still trembled in fear at the thought of the terror of a level 4 powerhouse. At the Ice Maiden Shefu's residence, Blitz successfully received his share of the family's rewards. A knowledge crystal that contained the knowledge of another world that his family had seized from the forest elves, a basic material reward of 20,000 magic crystals, 15 elven slaves, level 1 fighters. 3 magical equipment, level 1. 1,000-year tree core. There were more than a dozen miscellaneous rewards, but what Blitz valued the most were the first 5. Right now, after experiencing the crazy and bloody slaughter and evolution in the Fairn Plain, his individual strength had clearly risen to the peak of the first level. He might not even need 3 to 5 years to think about advancing to level 2 after returning to the Magus world. Blitz could directly collect some of the smaller rewards from Shefu, but rewards like the Elven Slaves, magical equipment, and 1,000-year tree core had to be collected from the public storage area of the Wizard's Pagoda. After bidding farewell to Shefu, Blitz could only run to the 3rd level of the Wizard's Pagoda. Strictly speaking, this was a slave and equipment market that the Wizard's Pagoda had set up to store and collect the spoils of war of individual witches or families. Compared to the cold and quiet levels of the other levels, the hustle and bustle here exceeded Blitz's expectations. There was a bustling crowd, all sorts of clothing and races, all kinds of strange products, as well as dazzling signboards and shops. Chapter 7:15. Perhaps it was Bliss's eye-catching black robe that had some effect. A handsome young man with dark skin ran up to Bliss and bowed. "Lord Sorcerer, may I know where you wish to go? Bill is willing to serve you." Bliss's green eyes scanned the area, and he asked in a strange native language, "How do you know I'm a wizard?" But it was no wonder that he was surprised, for there were many others like him in this vast and noisy marketplace, and almost all of them were wrapped up in thick robes or travelers' cloaks, so that not an inch of skin could be seen. Under such circumstances, a weak native youth was able to recognize his identity as a wizard. This was clearly out of Bliss's expectations. The native youth was slightly taken aback, then bowed with a strange expression. "Sir, mortals like us who are allowed to enter the Wizard's Pagoda have to wear this." With the native youth's guidance, Bliss realized that there was a strange brooch pinned to his chest. Bliss looked around, and found a similar brooch on everyone's chest. Closing his eyes, he could faintly feel the faint ripples of wizard spells emanating from the brooch. So that's it. Only wizards did not have to follow these security measures set for the mortals of the outside world. "So, I want to go to the slave market of the Pale Witches. Take me there." "This way, sir." As the owner of the Wizard's Pagoda, the slave market of the Pale Witches was undoubtedly located in the most eye-catching place on the 3rd level of the Wizard's Pagoda. The area it occupied was almost half of the entire 3rd level. Almost all of the captives that the witches had captured were locked up here, waiting to be sent back to the wizard world when the dimension door opened. But considering the entrance fee needed to pass through the dimension door, not all of the slaves would be taken away. The Dark Witches had captured more than 400 forest elves from the Callan continent in one go. There were old and young among them, and the ratio was not small. But no matter how powerful they were, the basic cost to pass through the dimension door was 100 magic crystals. An ordinary elf, even if transported back to the wizard world, would only be worth 20 to 30 magic crystals in the wizard world's market. But elves with special skills or elven fighters were several times more expensive than ordinary elves. Hence, if it wasn't necessary, No one would be willing to spend such an unwarranted amount of money to transport a bunch of losers back to the Magus world. In the 6 months that the Crimson family had been in the Callan continent, they had also captured more than 600 forest elves. If all of them were to be transported back to the sorcerer world, not only would they not be able to earn back the travel expenses, they would also have to fork out a large sum of money. Therefore, the ordinary elves and the old, weak, and sick elven warriors would be eliminated and put into the Ashen Witches' slave market to be sold to the natives of the Farron Plain. Only those who were carefully selected were worth the Crimson family spending a sum of magic crystals to bring them back. And as a reward from the family, Billis could pick out 15 elves from the Crimson family's capture for his own personal collection. They could be auctioned off or used as experimental materials. All the profits would belong to the wizard. It was because of Grimm's generosity that the wizards of the family were willing to brave great risks and fight with him in different planes. Walking into the shop opened by the Pale Witch, the first thing he saw was a row of old wooden cages lined up along the huge stone wall. Inside the wooden cages were slaves from another plane, some sitting, some lying, and some lying down. The wooden cages were not big, only about 10 square meters, but they were tightly packed with slaves and captives of different races, skin colors, and genders. There were Highland dwarves who were good at mining and smelting, kobolds who were good at digging and digging, ogre wizards who were up to 5 meters tall with 2 heads on their necks, and flame-tailed lions with fiery red fur and bright yellow flames burning on their tails. Of course, there were also forest elves who had been captured from the Callan continent. Seeing Billis walk in, a group of enthusiastic young girls surrounded him, speaking in the sorcerer's language that was not very familiar with. They attentively served this mysterious wizard who was hidden in a black robe. The native youth who had brought Billis here was pushed to the side with an awkward expression. Now that he was here, it was not his place to speak. "I'm here to collect my family's reward. This is the number plate." Billis took out a bronze plate and tossed it in his hand. "This is the Crimson family's mark plate. Their captives are all locked up in District 13's 25 to 41 wooden prison. Luna, take him there." An old magus who was reading a book behind a wooden table rolled her eyes, but only glanced at it once before paying no more attention. A young girl immediately left to carry out the order. District 13 was located in the center of the huge market. It was obvious that there were many slave leaders and representatives of the merchant guilds gathered here, and their arguments were especially intense. If it wasn't for the fact that fighting was forbidden in the market, some of the people who couldn't come to an agreement would have already started fighting. It had to be said that war was the best shortcut to getting rich. For the powerful nobles of the Farron continent, there were not many opportunities to obtain the specialties of the Callan continent. Although large numbers of slave ships would secretly head to the Callan continent every year, due to the storms in the sea, the raiding of the seafolk, and the existence of the elven patrols, the number of ships that could successfully return to the Farron continent could be counted on one hand. Given the extravagant nature of the nobles, they were extremely infatuated with the exotic forest elf. Thus, in the Farron continent, the price of forest elves, regardless of gender, was extremely high. Thus, among the many captives, a powerful grade 1 ogre might not even be worth as much as a young and beautiful acolyte female elf. When the young girl brought Bliss to a stop in front of a row of wooden cages, the magus could clearly see the emblem of the Crimson family's flaming hand on the thick, old pillars of the wooden cages. Within the wooden cages were densely packed forest elves, their eyes spitting flames of fury. Amongst them, there was not a single one that was too old or weak. They were all young elves with graceful figures and delicate faces. However, without exception, their shoulders were all branded with a circular magic brand, isolating them from elemental energy. Coupled with the effects of the enfeeblement spell, all of the elves looked sickly. They no longer had the nimbleness and agility they had when they climbed up and down the 100-meter tall trees in the magic forest as if they were walking on flat ground. Bliss's arrival had obviously attracted the attention of the merchants who were choosing their goods in front of the wooden cages. Seeing Bliss's strange attire, the more observant fellows all moved to the side, giving up the best spot in front of the wooden cages. Bliss walked around the Crimson family's wooden slave cages a few times, and found that there were not many ordinary elves within. 600 Grade 1 elven warriors was a significant loss to the elven kingdom. There were no Grade 2 elves, of course, this was almost certain. Such valuable Grade 2 elves would not be locked in such a crude and vile environment. They would definitely be gathered in a higher class place. Among these Grade 1 elven warriors, there were muscular sword dancers with elven battle tattoos all over their exposed skin, as well as elven archers with lithe bodies and nimble limbs. As for the elves with special abilities, such as elven wizards, druids, elven beast tamers, they were picked out and locked in a few adjacent wooden cages. To be honest, if it wasn't for the fact that the Callan continent's insect armies could not be brought back to the Magus world, Bliss would have settled down there and slowly devoured the forest elves. As an insect wizard, his physical strength was still on the weak side, and he did not have many powerful spells to use. Almost all battles were settled by the insect swarms and insect soldiers. This could allow him to defeat the strong, and he could grind down the powerful creatures that were far stronger than him. However, it did not bring much benefit to his individual strength. Hence, Bliss could only strive to find a balance between the growth of the insect swarms and his own strength. The most ambitious and crazy idea in his mind was to occupy a material plane with rich resources and many creatures, and then turn all the creatures there into his insect swarms, taking all the resources for himself. When that time came, he would become the master of the insect swarms that ruled over tens of thousands of planes, a great insect wizard that many magi looked up to. Unfortunately, after experiencing a few consecutive planar wars, the cruel reality made him understand that it was a fool's dream to achieve this with his mere Grade 1 strength. Hence, for greater development in the future, he gave up on the 100,000 insect armies that he had painstakingly gathered in the Callan continent. He brought some of the elites and all the insect soldiers, and resolutely returned to the Magus faction. At this moment, what kind of elves he would choose became a problem that required deep consideration. Ordinary elven warriors could only be used to incubate insect swarms, and only elves with elemental power were suitable to cultivate insect soldiers. Hence, Bliss focused most of his attention on the elven wizards and druids. Just as he was pondering over what to choose, a burly slave leader plucked up his courage and moved to Bliss' side. "Sir, I wonder if you're willing to sell your elf quota to us? We're willing to pay a high price and—" The slave leader lowered his voice and said, "We can get you something that might interest you." "Something that I'm interested in," Bliss sneered in a hoarse voice. "What do you mortals have that can satisfy me, humph? Sir, this is the list of items we brought this time, why don't you take a look first?" With that, the head slave carefully fished out an ancient sheepskin scroll from his bosom and silently unfurled it in front of Bliss. Bliss glanced at it, and the insect leader hidden in the shadow of his hood could not help but be slightly stunned. Chapter 7:16. The Nightmare Flower was an extremely rare magic plant. Because its petals and branches are bright red, it is often transplanted by people who do not know why it is in their own gardens or homes. Never in their wildest dreams would they have imagined that they had invited a flower of death that could kill without leaving a trace. The Nightmare Flower could slowly absorb the spiritual force of living beings around it, causing them to become mentally exhausted. If it was a regular person, they would often be tired and have nightmares in their sleep, which was why it was called the Nightmare Flower. As the Nightmare Flower absorbed divine force through a spiritual force field, and the process was very slow, regular people who were being absorbed would not be able to sense it at all. Hence, those who lusted after its beauty and transplanted it near their residences would eventually die of mental exhaustion for unknown reasons. Of course, such low-grade magic plants would not be able to cause any harm to magi. After all, with magi's acute spiritual force, they could easily sense the strange spiritual force field of the nightmare flower. According to what Bliss knew, the nightmare flower that continuously absorbed the spiritual force of humans for 10 years could be used to concoct a special speed thought potion. This speed thought potion was a rank 2 potion even in the Magus world, and could continuously replenish spiritual force for half an hour. If he could drink a bottle of the speed thought potion before advancing to a rank 2 Magus, the difficulty of breaking through would definitely be much lower. Hence, when he saw the name Flower of Misfortune on the list of items, Bliss was slightly startled. He could not help but reach out with his strange pincer, using the sharp tip of his pincer to lift the sheepskin scroll, and whispered, "What does this Flower of Misfortune look like? Describe it to me." Seeing that there was a chance, the burly slave immediately leaned over in a fawning manner. He did not seem to mind Bliss's non-human pincer at all, and used a fawning voice to describe the appearance, age, and quality of the Flower of Misfortune in detail. After listening to the description, the Lich Bliss immediately muttered to himself. To be honest, he did not have much hope before asking. After all, this was the Fane Plane, not the Magus world. Though the names of the two flowers were similar, they could be two completely different magic plants in different planes. However, through Leyland's description, Bliss was certain that the misfortune flower that grew in Fairn was the rarer nightmare flower in the Magus world. Of course, the Fairn dimension also had a large number of spellcasters, so they had also discovered the strange characteristics of a magic plant like the Doom Flower. However, the alchemy system of the Fairn Plane was far less developed than that of the Sorcerer world, and it was difficult to extract the spiritual force from the Flower of Misfortune through effective means. Hence, in the Magus world, a single nightmare flower was worth 6,000 magic crystals, but in the Fairn Plane, it was only a supplementary alchemy material. Its base value was around 200 to 300 magic crystals. Perhaps it was because of the scarcity of flowers of misfortune and the difference in their names that the Pale Witches did not discover them. Otherwise, such a good thing would never have fallen into Blitz's lap. Without hesitation, Bliss pulled the slave leader to a corner and started a half-serious, half-fake discussion. Although the slave leader saw that this batch of flowers of misfortune seemed to be more important to the other party, he still did not ask for too much out of consideration. After a round of haggling, Bliss transferred his quota of 15 elven slaves to the slave leader, while the other party took out 4 stalks of misfortune flowers that were all older than 20 years. After successfully stowing the 4 stalks of misfortune flowers into his waist pouch, all that was left was for the other party to choose the elven slaves. The other party had obviously already chosen the goods here, and very quickly picked out the elven slaves that he liked. His choice was even more out of Bliss's expectations. If Bliss were to choose, he would definitely choose those with high elemental affinity and powerful abilities. However, the slave leader had chosen all Grade 1 combatants, and their occupations included archers, wizards, and druids. But he had actually given up on the few high-grade elves, and chose the beginner-grade ones instead. Bliss's green eyes scanned the elves many times, and he was shocked to discover that the elves that the other party had chosen were not the strongest, but those graceful and tall bodies, those well-proportioned bodies, and those youthful and beautiful faces. The elves' slender and gentle beauty were all vividly displayed. After choosing the slaves, the native young lady waved a crystal rod and removed the protective spell formation of the wooden cages. She unlocked the door and chased the selected elves out one by one. The elves in the wooden cages immediately cried and cursed, and the entire scene turned into a mess. However, under the dual effects of the sealing spell and the weakening spell, the elves that had once dominated the illusory magic forest were now soft-footed crabs. The native young lady was at best an ordinary person, and her muscles were not strong enough. However, when she was angry, she could casually fling a sword dancer who was wielding an elven saber and carving flowers to the ground. Looking at the elves who were once invincible in the past, only to be reduced to weaklings at the mercy of others, an indescribable sadness and sorrow made all of the elves burst into tears. Not only did the people present not feel the slightest bit of sympathy for the cries of the weak, they instead laughed heartily, taking pleasure in their misfortune. After the transaction was completed, Bliss did not leave immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze to the other slave leaders and representatives of the Merchant Association. "Since you're here, why don't you take out whatever good stuff you have for me to see?" The transaction between the insect lich Bliss and the slave leader had long since caused a few of his companions to feel an unbearable itch. They immediately swarmed over and took out the transaction list that they had meticulously prepared. However, after Bliss's careful sweep, he really did find two rare materials that he was interested in: the red-scaled monarch bug and the dragon poison potion. The former was a strange bug with tough red scales, while the latter was a type of highly toxic potion. Even though he could not confirm their effects for the time being, collecting and studying them could be beneficial to Bliss's insect army in the future. These rare materials had either been overlooked by the Pale Witches, or they did not care about such small profits. Since they had somehow fallen into Bliss's hands, he naturally would not let them go so easily. Bliss spent the rest of his time in the slave market. Not only did he happily trade away his family's rewards, he even spent more than half of the 20,000 magic crystals he had just gotten. What he got in return was a large number of exotic plants, as well as some strange bugs and poisonous ants. Bliss had never felt so strongly before. Conquering in other dimensions was indeed the best shortcut to getting rich. Just as Bliss was indulging in the joy of treasuring in another dimension, Grim, the leader of the Crimson family, was receiving a mysterious guest in the wizard's pagoda. To be honest, even Grim did not expect that he would have an acquaintance visiting him in another dimension. "Lord Arms, I didn't expect you to still be in the Fairn dimension." Grim was surprised as he sat in his residence, leisurely tasting the fragrant wine in his hand. The newcomer removed the hood on his head, revealing a head full of blue hair that was densely covered in lightning and flickering sparks. Coupled with his handsome and robust face, he gave off an oppressive feeling of power without being angry. It was the level 3 Thunder Dragon Arms. Arms stood proudly and glanced around with his strange amber eyes. "You wizards are indeed the most powerful spellcasters in the multiverse. You can build such a powerful magic structure even in a foreign world." Arms clicked his tongue and said, "You wizards are indeed the most powerful spellcasters in the multiverse. No wonder you could survive the attacks of the natives." Grim did not know whether to laugh or cry as he listened to Arms flattering him. "Lord Arms, we're old acquaintances who have worked together many times. If you have any requests, I'll do my best to help." To be honest, the level 3 Thunder Dragon had taken a huge risk to visit Grim in disguise. Where was this? This was a wizard tower guarded by a level 4 witch. No matter how powerful the grade 3 Thunder Dragon was, once it attracted the attention of the witch in the tower, she could capture it alive in minutes and make it her own way. That was why he would not dare to step into the wizard's tower if he did not have confidence in Grim. Last time, he had been completely sealed, and Grim had not done anything to him. This time, he was in someone else's wizard tower. Even if Grim betrayed the Thunder Dragon, he would not be the one to benefit the most. Arms was even more certain that Grim would not betray him. However, as a rank 3 dragon, asking a rank 2 magus for help, this was a little hard to say. "Oh, I heard that in half a month you'll be opening the dimension door to return to the wizard world?" Arms had said a simple sentence, but it was unclear. But Grim still understood what he was saying. "That's right. The dimension door will open in 14 days. Grim looked at Arms in surprise. "Do you want to go to the wizard world with us, Lord?" It was no wonder that Grim was so surprised. The day the dimension door opened was when the witches were most vigilant. No matter how good the level 3 Thunder Dragon transformation spell was, it would be difficult to sneak through. Grimm had summoned the grade 3 Thunder Dragon from Lance Plane to Faern Plane. If it wanted to go back, it could easily teleport back using the power of the contract. Why would it need to go through the Sorcerer World? Don't worry, Lord. If you want to go to Lance Realm, I might be able to help you. What if there are too many people?
Oh!
11 dragons. Can you help me transport them back to Lance? Chapter 7:17. After a series of questions, Grimm finally understood why the Thunder Dragon Arms was still in the Faern Plane. He had barged into the Dragon's Cliff and abducted 11 powerful dragons from the forest dragons. Grimm's mouth twitched when he heard this. The muscles on his face twitched, and he felt the urge to throw his head back and laugh out loud. He didn't think that his random move would cause the forest elves to suffer such a huge loss. Grimm, who had suffered so much at the hands of the elven sword master, felt extremely satisfied. The current situation was clear. Arms had abducted 11 dragons of different ranks, but he didn't have the ability to bring them back to the Lance Plane. It would be easy for Arms to return to Lance on his own, but it would be impossible for him to take the 11 dragons with him. Left with no other choice, Arms could only turn his attention to the only Tier 2 wizard he knew. 11 dragons. Among them, there was 1 Tier 3 dragon, 3 Tier 2 dragons, and 7 Tier 1 dragons. Such an alluring giant dragon battle team was actually introduced by him, and now it had fallen into someone else's pocket. At this moment, Grimm's feelings were extremely complicated. His young and handsome face even had an expression of not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Hence, when Grimm heard Arms' question, he was momentarily at a loss for words. "We can promise you, Lord Arms." A crisp female voice suddenly sounded from the side. "We can guarantee that you and your dragon subordinates will arrive at the Lance Plane safely. However, the teleportation fees." The Type 3 Thunder Dragon's eyes widened in disbelief as it stared at Alice, who had suddenly appeared in the room. "Tier 2. Even you're a Tier 2. The Thunder Dragon couldn't help but mutter. Dragons and wizards were creatures of 2 different dimensions. The giant dragon race had a long life force and powerful individual strength. The dragon race's inheritance was even more enviable. That was why they had a completely different outlook on life. To dragons, 100 years was too short. A few naps and it would pass without a sound. However, to those with short lifespans, 100 years was more than half of their lives. Dragons rarely made friends with humans. It wasn't that they didn't want to, but it was unnecessary. To be honest, humans who were powerful enough to stand on equal footing with the giant dragons were usually in the twilight of their lives. To make friends with such a fellow, perhaps in the time it took for a dragon to sleep, the other party would have died of old age long ago. Even the corpse under the soil would have become a pile of unrecognizable bones. Although the sorcerers were powerful, they also inherited many of the flaws of humans. Even those rank 4 magi would find it hard to compete with a dragon in terms of lifespan. Perhaps it was because of the short lifespan that the wizards grew at an astonishing speed and efficiency. 2 months ago, when they last met, Alice was still a dying person whose life force was about to completely disappear. But this time, the other party had actually become a Tier 2 divine warrior. Not only that, but whenever Arms gazed at Alice's youthful body and face, he would feel a little uneasy. It was as if her delicate body contained something that even he had to revere. "Did you absorb the quasi-relic?" Arms asked out of the blue. Now, even the Grade 2 green dragon August had become his subordinate. Arms had a certain understanding of what Grimm and Alice had done in the past. "Not yet. I only absorbed a little." As her life force flowed back into her, Alice's beautiful face and perfect figure were restored. At the same time, even her spiritual force field was filled to the brim. At this moment, let alone having a spiritual connection with her, just seeing her sweet smile would make one's mood improve. Weak beings wouldn't even be able to sense that their minds were being controlled. Only a Tier 3 divine warrior like Arms could sense the strange intimacy that came with Alice's words, figure, and aura. Creature affinity. Arms couldn't help but frown. Unbeknownst to him, Alice's overflowing spiritual power also carried a trace of biological affinity power. Only a Tier 3 divine warrior like Arms could sense and resist the influence of this affinity, but for those weaker than him, the moment they saw Alice, they couldn't help but think of her as one of their own. This also meant that those who couldn't resist Alice's affinity would never take the initiative to attack her. This was a good way to protect themselves. However, even if Alice advanced, she would still be a weak little witch in front of a Tier 3 thunder dragon. Arms quickly broke free from Alice's phantom affinity. Only then did he remember what she had said. "Do you have a way to send 11 dragons to Lance? Tell me, how much will it cost? As you know, we'll have to deal with those grade 4 witches through the planar gate. That's why I have to spend some energy to conceal their dragon aura. I'll only charge you 200,000 magic crystals." 200,000 mana crystals? That's not much, I'll pay for it. To be honest, this was actually the most difficult part of the smuggling operation. Trying to sneak 11 dragons through the planar gate under the noses of a group of high-ranked witches was as difficult as a successful ogre becoming a thief and successfully stealing a dragon's treasure. With the unique smell and elemental aura of dragons, even if they were separated by 8 to 10 miles, it would still be impossible to hide from a high-ranked witch's mental perception. Moreover, more than half of the 11 dragons were grade 1 green dragons, and they didn't have the strength to conceal their aura. Hence, if Arms and his group of dragons barged into the planar gate on the day it opened to the public, the pale, Tier 4 witch would capture him alive and flay his tendons. But before Arms could agree to it with a smile, Alice continued her sentence. Crossing the planar gate costs 10,000 magic crystals for a grade 1 dragon, 20,000 for a grade 2 dragon, and 50,000 for a grade 3 dragon. So expensive? Arms' expression stiffened, but he forced a smile. All right. No problem. Unfortunately, Alice wasn't done yet. Teleporting from the Witch Union headquarters to the Tower of Destiny will cost the same. Arms couldn't even force a smile anymore. Teleporting from the Tower of Destiny to the Lance Plane will cost the same. This time, Arms' expression turned completely ashen, his strange vertical pupils filled with anger and humiliation. The total cost of teleporting was already close to 1,000,000 magic crystals. Even as a grade 3 Dragon Lord, Arms couldn't afford such a frightening cost. This was like forcing a dragon to hang itself. But considering Sir Arms' financial situation, we can accept payment in installments or as collateral. Of course, if Sir Arms is willing to join the Crimson Clan, we can immediately have the cost. Alice smiled sweetly at Arms. Her smile was as sweet as an angel's, but the Tier 3 Thunder Dragon could clearly see a pair of demonic wings behind her back. "I will never bow down to the weak. This is the unwavering will of our dragon race." Arms roared with a proud expression even though he had been forced into a corner. "That's a pity." Alice's smile didn't change. "Since you and your subordinates aren't members of the Thunder Dragon family, you won't be able to enjoy the half-price discount. So, Great Thunder Dragon, how do you plan to pay for the teleportation?" Ugh, just a moment ago, Arms had been wearing a proud and unyielding expression on his face. Yet, in the next moment, he had completely deflated. For the first time in 2 months, he couldn't help but feel regret for the number of dragons he had kidnapped. If only the number of green dragons following him was a little less, perhaps he would face less financial pressure. 1,000,000 magic crystals. That's 1,000,000 magic crystals. If he really had 1,000,000 magic crystals, he wouldn't have to go through so much trouble to rob those poor goblins. For the past 2 months, Arms had been wandering around the Farron Plain with the little emerald female dragon, immersing himself in the admiration of his subordinates. Before this, Arms had been feeling proud of his powerful charm. But now, he was filled with endless regret and annoyance. With the dragon's habit of accumulating wealth, he should be able to make up for this huge gap if he borrowed some money from the little emerald female dragon. But when he thought of Aretina's bashful expression of admiration, Arms couldn't help but hesitate. The stinginess of the dragons was as well known as their lustful nature. Putting himself in her shoes, if he was Aladina and found out that the guy she liked was eyeing her treasure, he would probably turn hostile in the next moment. No, I can't get any ideas from Aretina. Maybe I should ask the other dragon subordinates to pay for the teleportation? But if I do that, I'm afraid that the dragons I just roped in will become disloyal. Arms, who had been arrogant and domineering just a moment ago, immediately turned into a young dragon that hated the world. He gritted his teeth for a long time, but still couldn't make a decision. Lord Arms, if you have any decent treasures or strange items, we can also pay for them. Wishful thinking. You evil creatures. Don't ever think of coveting my treasure. Arms was like a cigarette that would ignite at the slightest touch. The moment someone tried to lay their hands on his treasure, he would instantly go crazy. Then, Lord Arms, I have a plan here. I wonder if you would be willing to listen to it. At this moment, Grim could clearly smell a conspiracy from the sweet smile on Alice's face. Chapter 7:18. On the opening day of the Planar Gate. After 8 months of killing in the Otherworld, the factions of the Northern Witches had also returned to the Shadow Island one after another. Those who had not returned by this time would probably never be able to return. There was always a loss for every gain. Even for the witches who had returned, their teams had shrunk to varying degrees. The Dark Witches lost 2 people, the Death Witches lost 1, and the Winter Witches lost 1. Secretly counting, except for the Destiny Witches who lost 4 people, some of which were seriously injured, the losses of the other factions were mostly between 1 or 2 people. However, the Destiny Witches were still not the ones who suffered the most. Surprisingly, almost all of the sham witches who had chosen to go to the Ocean Empire had died. Only the Tier 3 which had managed to escape and return to the Ocean Empire. However, looking at her appearance, there was not much sadness on her face, so she should have successfully completed the mission. You get what you pay. The witches of the various factions suffered losses, but their gains were also abundant. Chests after chests of rare treasures, cages of magical beasts, rows of non-humankind slaves, and bulging purses and storage rings. Although the death of their companions was sad, the remaining witches had gained experience through the planar expedition and successfully collected a lot of otherworld resources. It had to be said that the major wizard organizations used this method to achieve the survival of the fittest and select the internal elite. At the same time, it also effectively tilted the increasingly rare wizard resources to the hands of the strong. Of course, the real gains of the major witch factions would never be announced, and they were carefully and cleverly hidden. The only things that could be spied on by outsiders were the slaves and magical beasts that could not be hidden. The Winter Witches, the Pale Witches, the Death Witches, the Pain Witches, and the Deception Witches chose to attack the human kingdoms, so the slaves and magical beasts they brought back were also of a variety, covering almost all the creatures in the magical encyclopedia of the Faerun continent. The Dark Witches and the Destiny Witches went to the Elven Kingdom, so the harvest was all forest elves and natural magical beasts of various ranks. In particular, the Dark Witches seemed to have gone crazy and actually brought back more than 400 forest elves in one breath. There were old and young among them, and it seemed to be a relatively complete tribe. Transporting so many elven slaves back to the sorcerer world would probably cost millions of magic crystals. Such a big move made all the witches secretly shocked, and they could not help but start to guess the reason why the other party did this. In comparison, they had lost half of their manpower in exchange for Leader Alice's promotion from Tier 1 to Tier 2. This did not seem to be worth it. But considering that the Destiny Witches had just been revived and all their hopes were pinned on Alice, it was not surprising that she made such a choice. On the other hand, the Witches of Destiny's capture was not very eye-catching. 50 carefully selected elven captives and more than 30 nature-type magical beasts. This kind of harvest could only be considered to be passable. Moreover, he didn't know what these Destiny Witches were thinking. They actually mixed a dozen stinky three-headed snake lizards with the spoils of war. Although the three-headed snake lizard was rare in the sorcerer's world, it was not unique. As long as he was willing to put in the effort and search the Black Forest, he would definitely be able to capture it. But the Destiny Witches were actually willing to spend such an expensive ticket to bring these guys with only beginner level 1 strength back to the sorcerer's world. It was as if they were afraid that having too many magic crystals would burn their hands. But these were all minor details. What really attracted the attention of the witches was the hypocritical witch who escaped alone. She was purely alone, with not a single spoil of war or a single captive. The situation was as awkward as it could get. Seeing this situation, a few of the leading Tier 3 witches could not help but approach her to communicate. Unfortunately, no matter how much they probed and teased her, they could not figure out what the other party's mission was. Just as the group of witches had gathered at the giant teleportation plaza on the inner island and were discussing this matter, the wizard's pagoda that stood tall within the volcano trembled slightly. It shot out a blinding white light, then slowly tore open a space fissure with violent energy surging within it. The huge wizard formation hidden under the teleportation plaza also began to operate. A mysterious and profound light formation composed of pure magical energy slowly emerged and began to rotate slowly with the torn space fissure as the center. 2 tall strange giants suddenly appeared on both sides of the space fissure and roared. They grabbed the edge of the fissure with their hands and pulled it wider. When the space fissure opened to a width of 30 meters, the 2 giants roared and instantly turned into 2 tall golden doors, firmly stabilizing the space fissure. Hurry up and go through. There is a lot of flesh and blood of creatures like the cloud giant. This space gate can only last for a quarter of an hour. Hurry up. Under the urging of the leading pale witch, the team of witches who had already counted the number of people in advance and paid the ticket finally began to move forward slowly. Whether it was people or objects, or the otherworld magical beasts imprisoned in the metal cages, they were instantly sucked into the space gate and disappeared without a trace when they touched it. The cries and screams of the captives in the team became louder. Perhaps they had already realized that after crossing this light gate, what awaited them was no longer the familiar world, people, and things that they were familiar with. Their former companions and relatives would also be written off, and they would never have the chance to see them again. Wizard World, Vilnan. The location of the Witch Council. The strange phenomenon caused by the vibration of the void plane had not completely dissipated. Inside the huge light gate in the teleportation hall, layers of ripples in the space kept trembling. Every time it trembled, a number of strange creatures would be spat out from it. These captives and magical beasts, who had never experienced interplane long-distance teleportation, were all lying in the cages with a weak look on their faces. It was obvious that they were undergoing the baptism of the wizard world's plane law. Those who were slightly weaker opened their mouths and panted desperately. Every breath they took was as difficult as going through a life-and-death battle. On the contrary, when all the witches and wizards stepped out of the light gate, they all seemed to be in high spirits. The surrounding void continuously surged with a comfortable and gentle aura, like the warm embrace of a mother, causing the witches and wizards present to involuntarily be intoxicated, their souls floating. This was actually a normal phenomenon after wizards returned from the otherworld. After all, the wizard world was the place where the origin of their souls were placed and branded. Only in this place could they display 100% of their strength. In the otherworld, however, they would always be in a state of suppression and rejection. Hurry up, hurry up. Hurry up and transport these captives out to recuperate. These elves are too delicate. If we don't hurry up and take care of them, most of them will die here." Under the series of commands from the leading witch, the tall wizard beasts that had been waiting at the periphery of the teleportation hall rushed in and helped the witches carry the spoils of war and slaves out. Alice, who was dressed in a purple starry robe, stretched out her hand to stop the witches and wizard beasts in front of her. "We don't need your help with our spoils of war. Tell your manager to hurry up and activate the teleportation formation. We want to return directly to the Tower of Destiny." Hearing this, the witches were completely dumbfounded. What? Teleport back to the Tower of Destiny? Was this Alice crazy? No matter how many spoils of war and slaves she brought back, it would only cost a few thousand magic crystals to hire a caravan to transport them back to the Tower of Destiny. But if they were to use the teleportation formation, they would probably need tens of thousands of magic crystals. Just as the witches were in a state of shock, another witch stood out. "Activate the teleportation formation. I also need to return directly to the clan." The witches looked over, and saw that it was the only remaining Grade 3 Witch of Deception. It seemed that there was something strange going on between the two witch teams, which was why they were worried about any undue delay, and wanted to immediately return to their clan. Regarding such a request, the Ceticilia family, who was responsible for protecting Wilning, naturally had no reason to refuse. Soon after the rest of the witch teams left the teleportation hall, the teleportation formation here began to operate slowly. Tong following two muffled sounds, the Witches of Destiny and the Witch of Deception disappeared in the teleportation formation, one after another. Hurry up, carry this, and this out for me." Under the command of Sophia and Chave, the witch apprentices who had long received the news swarmed forward, either using levitation spells or commanding their wizard beasts to carry the boxes of spoils of war out of the teleportation formation. They had only carried out 1/3 of the spoils of war and captives they had brought back. The rest of the boxes and wooden cages were already placed in the teleportation formation, including the cages that held a dozen or so three-headed snake scorpions. This time, the Witches of Destiny have lost a lot of power. I might need some time to rearrange the affairs here. I'll leave the matters over there to you. Alice stood outside the teleportation formation, waving at Grim. "The situation over at Lance is very troublesome, you have to be careful." Immediately after, a white light rose up and enveloped the entire teleportation formation. When the blinding white light dissipated, there was nothing left in the room. Lance Plain, Metal Fortress. As a dazzling white light overflowed from the teleportation formation, many figures suddenly appeared on the teleportation platform. Smelling the familiar and intimate smell of the plane, the Thunder Dragon Arms, who had been disguised as a three-headed snake lizard by the baleful polymorph spell, roared and broke free from the illusion on its body. It smashed the wooden cage with its head, and began to roar and stretch its body. Following suit, the rest of the giant dragons broke out of their cages one after another, roaring as they restored their bodies. Chapter 719. Welcome back, my master. A slightly muffled voice suddenly came from the side. What's up with these dragons? Have they become your slaves? All right, Gazlo, we'll talk about these things later. Why don't you tell me about the situation in Lance while I was away? Grim quickly interrupted the brain monster and successfully changed the topic. Ugh, master, the situation here, maybe, isn't too good. Gazlo stuttered, as if he had something he couldn't say. Before Grim could ask, he felt the ground beneath him tremble, and the mountain on top of the dome began to shake inexplicably. Following that, a loud dragon's roar came through the thick rock and metal walls, reverberating above the empty metal fortress. The dragons were attacking the metal fortress? Grim's brows furrowed again. Master, ever since you left the metal fortress, those dragons have been attacking this place with all their might as if they've gone mad. They would come here once every 2 or 3 days, and there would be 6 to 7 of them each time. They're also at Grade 1, Grade 2, and Grade 3. It seems like they're trying to outlast us. With a pillar of support, the Grade 3 brain monster Gaz, Lu immediately went into complaining mode. He could tell that it had been tortured by the uninvited flying lizards over the past few days. "Let me see what's happening outside," Grim said in a deep voice. Lance was a rare dragon's treasure trove. There weren't just dragons inside, but moving magic crystal mountains. So no matter what, he would not give up on this forward operating base and this safe metal fortress. Under such circumstances, the safety of the metal fortress was undoubtedly his greatest concern. A metal platform slowly rose from the floor in front of Grim. A white crystal inlaid on the platform projected a huge screen of light, showing the situation outside the metal fortress in full view. It could be seen that the screen was at the top of a mountain a dozen miles away. From this angle, he could clearly see everything that was happening outside the metal fortress. On the screen, outside the mountain where the metal fortress was located, 7 dragons were flapping their wings and soaring in the blue sky. They raised their necks and let out loud dragon roars that shook the heavens and earth. From time to time, a dragon would suddenly fold its wings and swoop down, shooting dozens of energy rays against the metal fortress, using a terrifying dragon flame to wash the rock and metal walls. This black flame was like a thick pillar of fire. As the dragon's head moved left and right, it swept out a huge fan. The sticky black flame with strong adhesion constantly washed the rock walls of the mountain, and the extreme temperature quickly melted the rocks. In the blink of an eye, the rock walls that the dragon flame swept past flowed down like molten copper, revealing the dark golden metal wall below. With Gaz Lu guarding the metal fortress, of course, it would not sit and wait. Terrifying energy rays shot out like dense lines of fire. Even with the tough scales and high magic resistance of a dragon, it was difficult to defend against magic attacks of this degree. He only had time to breathe once before a series of bloody holes appeared on the huge body of the swooping dragon. Large amounts of dragon blood splashed out and instantly dyed the dragon a blood dragon. The dragon felt the pain and let out a mournful roar. It flapped its wings frantically and struggled to escape the attack range of the energy rays. Grim could not help but sigh inwardly. Only a dragon could do this. If it were any other monster, they would have long been pierced through by the dense rain of energy rays with an attack power of up to 210 degrees. How could they possibly take such a terrifying attack and escape? That should have been a Tier 1 dragon. If even it could survive the bombardment of the metal fortress, then those Tier 2 dragons. Before Grim could finish his thoughts, what he was worried about happened. Seeing that one of its companions was injured, a Tier 2 dragon actually let out a long roar and grabbed a terrifying boulder that weighed half a ton from a nearby mountain peak. It struggled to fly up, then folded its wings and swooped down at high speed. Seeing that the situation was bad, a dozen or so pitch-black cannons stretched out of the metal fortress and gathered a dazzling magic light before firing rapidly at the diving dragon. It was like watching a high-definition magic animation. The Tier 2 dragon opened up a path with a ferocious dragon breath, which offset most of the energy rays. As for the remaining rays, they struck the dragon's scales that were filled with a metallic luster. Although they left a few bloody holes, it was not enough to threaten the dragon's life. The dragon swooped down at high speed. When the sharp hurricane passed through the dragon's sharp-boned spurs and thorns, it let out a shrill howl. Relying on Ojwa's flying skills, the dragon swooped down and accelerated, dragging the boulder behind it with its claws as it smashed down like a meteor. When its speed and momentum had been brewed to the peak, the giant dragon loosened its claw, curled its body into a ball, and rolled away from the side. As everyone watched, the boulder, which had reached its peak speed, whistled through the air and smashed into the outer wall of the metal fortress. Thud, after an earth-shattering boom, the outer wall caved in, forming a deep pit. The deafening sound of metal rang in the ears of Grimm and the others, and for a moment they could not hear anything. At some point, Arms, the emerald dragons, and the green dragons had gathered behind Grimm, watching the scene on the screen curiously. Fire dragons! Arms lowered his huge body to Grimm's side and said gloatingly, "It's Pheliba and her legion. You're out of luck." Pheliba was the Tier 3 female flame dragon residing in Doomsday Castle. At the request of the Tier 2 wind dragon, Chax, she had sent her legion of Dragonborn to ambush Grimm and the others. Unfortunately, this legion of up to 300 Dragonborn and the 200 dragon followers accompanying them had been wiped out by the wizards in the depths of the Swamp of Sorrows. Since then, the female fire dragon had gone completely berserk. The first few times she had come to disturb the metal fortress, she had suffered greatly under the concentrated bombardment of the magic cannons. Not only did she not give up, she ran back to Doomsday Castle and desperately gathered more people. As a result, the male dragons who had once been her guests answered her summons and followed her to harass and attack the metal fortress. Thanks to them, the energy reserves of the metal fortress had not increased during this period of time. Instead, they had been drying up day by day, which was a source of frustration for the Tier 3 brain monster, Gaz Luvi. Even though the Level 3 brain monster, Gaz Ruvi's level was extremely high, its own offensive and defensive capabilities were extremely weak. Almost all of his power came from the magic furnace and the metal fortress. It could be said that the magic furnace was his heart, the metal fortress was his body, and Gaz Luvi was just a brain monster commanding them. Gaz Luvi had also tried to send the metal magic equipment out to chase the dragons away. Unfortunately, it was like sending sheep into a tiger's den. The number of people who could climb back in one piece could be counted on two hands. The rest were all smashed to smithereens by the Tyrannosauruses. Since then, Gaz Luvi no longer dared to send people out to challenge the dragons. Relying on the sturdy metal fortress and inexhaustible magic energy, he used the magic cannons to forcefully defend his position. However, because of this, the development plan of the lance plane that Grimm had handed to him before he left was ruined. The dragons had also learned their lesson. Since they had thick skin and flesh, they acted as the main force to entangle the metal fortress. On the other hand, the Draconid subordinates and vassal forces were deployed nearby, forming a tight killing line that sealed the metal fortress tightly within. To be honest, the Tier 3 brain monster, Gaz Luvi, had always been arrogant and condescending. Even though he had become Grimm's contracted slave, he only thought that he had made a mistake due to a moment of carelessness. In the depths of his heart, Gaz Luvi refused to admit that this Tier 2 wizard was smarter and more resourceful than he was. However, after these days of torture, Gaz Luvi had no choice but to painfully admit that he had no way to deal with a group of rogue dragons that did not play by the rules. He could only rely on the giant warships and cannons to keep them out of the fortress. As for the sealing line and strangulation line outside, he was basically helpless. He could only hide inside the metal fortress and muddle along. Therefore, when he suddenly saw Grimm return with such a large group of dragons, Gaz Luvi's heart that had been tormented for a long time was once again burning with passion. For the first time, he sincerely hoped that this weak wizard master could come up with a way to expel these damned dragons from his territory as soon as possible. Facing Gaz Luvi's fervent request, Grimm did not respond. Instead, he turned around and looked at Arms beside him. "Lord Arms, what do you think of the current situation?" "GGG. Little fellow, are you begging me this time?" The Thunder Dragon's eyes suddenly lit up, and it immediately became unscrupulous. "You've extorted a lot of money from me this time. Now you want me to fight for you for free? I won't do it for 200,000 magic crystals, less than that." It had to be said that after hanging around Magi for so long, even a proud dragon would become unscrupulous and calculative. Grimm smiled faintly, his youthful and delicate face filled with unconcealable ridicule. Lord Arms, you've brought back so many dragon companions this time. Where do you plan to put them? You can't possibly stuff them all into your territory, right? Arms was stunned, and the smile on his face disappeared. For the first time, he began to consider this headache. Even as a Tier 3 Dragon Lord, the Thunder Dragon Arms territory only spanned 400 kilometers. In the human world, such a territory would be more than enough to house 20 to 30 human lords. However, to the dragons, such a territory was still too small. This time, he had suddenly brought back 11 dragons and was leading them through the street. It was indeed very eye-catching, enough to make all the dragon lords envious. However, if he wanted to settle them down, his small territory would be stretched thin, and it would seem a little shabby. Chapter 720. The Lance Plain was a paradise for dragons. However, the prerequisite was that you had to be an orthodox dragon. Emerald dragons could not compare to pure gold dragons, but they were still considered true dragons. However, it was a pity that the green dragon that came along this time was not one of the orthodox dragon clan. If this inferior dragon's claws were a little harder and its strength was a little stronger, it was possible for it to make a name for itself. However, they would still be rejected by the true dragons who claimed to have pure bloodlines. If the emerald dragons that followed Armas to Lance became dragon lords, there would be no problem. However, if those green dragons became dragon lords, they would definitely be attacked by the other dragons nearby. This was an unwritten rule in the Lance Plain. Even Armas could not do anything about it. Back in the Fairn Plain, Armas had made a lot of promises in one go to recruit the dragons. He had also painted a picture of a perfect paradise for dragons. If it couldn't be realized now, it would inevitably cause them to be disloyal and abandon it. Armas, the Grade 3 Thunder Dragon, could not help but fall silent after hearing Grimm's question. Sir, now that you've recruited a strong army, why don't you take the opportunity to expand your territory? Grimm sneered maliciously, clearly trying to fan the flames. Armas knew that Armas was just trying to fish in troubled waters, but the wizard's suggestion hit him in his weak spot. He could not help but hesitate. I only realized it after I came here. You dragons often fight amongst yourselves over territory. The winner gets the land and the loser is forced to leave. Isn't that the truth? Grimm continued to persuade Armas. But our dragon clan will never kill each other. Even the losers will be able to leave smoothly with their wealth. We will not allow outsiders to trample on our bottom line. Armas said arrogantly. Obviously, it did not have a good impression of wizards who killed people to the point of death and were ruthless towards their own people. Of course. I will not force you to go against the dragon spirit. Grimm chuckled. However, Lord Arms, the next time you want to banish a dragon, can you give us a heads up first? You want the land and the people, and I want the loser. As long as the loser leaves its territory, it has nothing to do with you, right? Arms was speechless. He was once again shocked by the shrewdness and calculation of the human wizard. These human sorcerers seemed to have no principles or bottom line. Even among their own kind, they could not avoid tearing flesh off their bones. They were even more vicious to outsiders. However, no matter how he thought about it, this seemed to be the only way to solve this problem. After all, this time, he had been able to smuggle 11 dragons from the Fairn Plain to the Lance Plain. He had helped out greatly. According to the contract between Arms and Alice, the Tier 3 dragon would have to work for a long time before she could repay such a large sum of money. Arms gritted his teeth and made up his mind. I'll chase away these dragons for you. I won't charge you anything. However, from today onwards, I'll deal with the dragon lords in the territories that I've taken a liking to. You'll be in charge of taking care of the draconid armies and subordinate forces. If there are unexpected gains, I want half. Grimm smiled leisurely. Arm's words were vague, but Grimm understood what he was trying to say. Obviously, Arms wanted a share of the profits, but he didn't want to be stained with the blood of his own kind. From now on, Arms would be able to challenge his own kind in the name of a Dragon Lord. If the Dragon Lord lost, Arms would have no choice but to let the Dragon Lord leave with his wealth. At that time, the human sorcerers would be responsible for ambushing the Dragon Lord. The unexpected gains he was talking about were probably the Dragon Lord's personal treasures. Although this was not Grimm's original intention, Grimm still agreed and signed a new alliance contract with Arms. After the contract was signed, Arms commanded the 12 dragons to rush out of the metal fortress and pounce on the female dragon and the 6 male dragons that were still hovering in the sky. To be honest, even the rank 3 Pheliba was shocked when she saw a large group of dragons rushing out of the metal fortress, not to mention the rank 1 and 2 male dragons. However, without any explanation, the group of giant dragons that suddenly appeared pounced on them, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, and launched an attack on their own kind. They were outnumbered, and the dragons under Arms' command were of a higher rank than the female dragons' team. The two sides only clashed for a few rounds in the sky before one of the dragons in the team turned around and ran away. Dragon incantation shook the sky. Unfortunately, no matter how the female dragon cursed and roared, Arms did not say a word. Instead, he brought his beloved emerald dragon, Aratina, and attacked the female dragon. 2 rank 3 dragons worked together to deal with a single rank 3 female dragon. Even Pheliba, who called herself the Star of Doom, could not withstand the ferocious attacks. Dragon blood rained down from the sky, and dragon scales the size of washbasins fell from the sky. Unable to withstand the pincer attack of the 2 dragons, the female dragon finally decided to retreat. Flapping her tattered red wings, she desperately flew back to her territory. As for the male dragons that were still fighting on the battlefield, she could not care less about them. Although they had the upper hand, Arms and the other dragons did not kill all of them. To be more precise, the Dragon Alliance did not allow dragons to kill each other. It was fine to fight for a mate or territory, but killing their own kind was not allowed. If a dragon killed its own kind, it would be punished by the great dragon god, and become the common enemy of all dragons. Therefore, even though Arms and the other dragons were much stronger in terms of rank and number, he could only watch as the dragons ran away. Gaz-Lu, send out your eyeball guards and investigate the whereabouts and territories of all the dragons. How dare they come to our territory to show off? I'll find a chance to get rid of them one by one. Grimm snorted coldly as he watched the 2 groups of dragons leave one after the other. As you wish. The dragon plague that had troubled him for half a year was finally over. Gaz-Lu was filled with anger and fury. With Grimm's permission, a rock in a hidden corner of the mountain where the metal fortress was located was gently moved to one side, revealing a huge entrance. 30 to 40 metal eyeballs swarmed out like a swarm of bees, chasing after the dragons as they flew into the distance. At the same time, more maintenance androids poured out of the metal fortress and began to repair the outer walls and magic cannons. There were even androids that gathered large chunks of rock from nearby and stuck them on the outer walls. That way, even dragons with their super eyesight would not be able to quickly identify the location of the metal fortress if they flew past from afar. Under Gaz-Lu's control, the metal fortress was still continuously mining the metal veins beneath the mountain. The energy it needed came entirely from the magic furnace, and it did not rely on external sources. This way, it would not attract any attention. After smoothing out the development plans of the Lance Dimension with a few words, Grimm once again returned to the Blazing Flame Monarch through the teleportation formation. Wizard World, Blazing Flame Monarch. He had just come out of the teleportation formation when he met Gargamel, who had hurried over to welcome him. Have you dealt with the captives and spoils of war? Yes. Gargamel replied respectfully. All of the spoils of war have been stored in the Wizard's Pagoda's warehouse. As for the captives, they've been locked up on the 2nd floor of the Wizard's Pagoda. Also, Since my lord has returned successfully, do you think we should prepare a grand welcoming banquet tonight?" Hearing this, Grim paused and muttered to himself for a moment. Even though he was not interested in such banquets, as the members of his family gradually grew stronger and expanded, such banquets would become a necessity. After all, this was an important way for the members of the family to get to know each other. "Yes, I think that's fine. Just do as you see fit. The time is tonight, and the location is set to be on the 3rd floor of the Wizard's Pagoda." "Understood, my lord. I'll go and make the preparations right away." Nodding repeatedly, Gargamel gave a simple report of the Wizard's Pagoda's situation before leaving quickly. Walking slowly to the residence on the 4th floor of the Wizard's Pagoda, Grim was not surprised to see Mary reclining on a large bed in the room. At some point in time, she had changed into a thin and soft black silk robe. The silk robe was not large, and it barely covered Mary's delicate shoulders. It revealed her smooth and beautiful snow-white neck, complete collarbone, and a small portion of her flesh. As for the bottom, it did not even reach her knees, revealing Mary's slender calves and beautiful, round ankles. "Why, that Alice didn't let you stay there for the night?" Mary's delicate and charming face was filled with a faint smile and unconcealable jealousy. "Have you settled the matters on Lance's side?" Even Grim could not help but swallow a mouthful of saliva as Mary's perfect, jade-like body gently stretched on the silky bed. "Then do you have any plans for the celebration?" Mary continued to ask in a seductive tone. She rolled around on the bed like a young lady. As her movements increased, the corners of the silk robe opened and closed, revealing her smooth, white thighs. Even the alluring triangular area became faintly discernible, causing Grim to lose his breath. "I had wanted to take a bath and change before the banquet, but I've changed my mind." "What did you change your mind about?" Mary curiously stopped rolling around and asked as she propped herself up. Looking at the boundless beauty that was enough to make him restless, Grim roared in annoyance. "I've decided. Before the banquet, I'll eat you up." Chapter 721. The welcome banquet was held on the 3rd level of the Wizard's Pagoda. Those who could attend this banquet were the first batch of founding members of the Crimson family. Even though the family head Grim and Lady Mary had not arrived yet, the atmosphere was still as lively as ever. Most of the family's sorcerers had just returned from other dimensions. They were all brimming with money, and even their individual abilities had increased by quite a bit. Putting everything else aside, just the insect Lich Bliss, who had never revealed himself, had already risen from intermediate Tier 1 to peak Tier 1. If everything went smoothly, in another 10 years or so, it could become the second family magus to successfully advance to rank 2 after Lady Mary. Level 2, to put it bluntly, this was the limit of most sorcerers' dreams. As for level 3 and 4, without exceptional talent or amazing encounters, most sorcerers would never be able to reach such a high level even if they worked hard for their entire lives. The Sorcerer's Handbook had a very comprehensive summary of the sorcerer's advancement system. First, to become a sorcerer, one had to have the talent to become a sorcerer, and then become an apprentice. The so-called talent to become a sorcerer referred to elemental talent. According to the Sorcerer Association's statistics, in the sorcerer world, there was only a 1.31% chance of a mortal being born with elemental talent. This also meant that out of 1,000 mortals, there would at most be 13 apprentices with elemental talent. And of these 13 apprentices, half would become mortals again because they would not be able to master meditation. As for the rest, they would have to slowly advance step by step from beginner apprentice to mid-level apprentice, high-level apprentice, and prospective sorcerer before they would have the right to become a sorcerer. According to the statistics, the success rate of an apprentice advancing to become a sorcerer was less than 15%. However, this success rate could still be increased through various methods and resources. Thus, some sorcerers joked that the birth of a sorcerer's apprentice depended on luck, while the birth of a sorcerer depended on accumulation. No matter how bad a sorcerer's talent was, as long as the family was willing to devote resources to nurture them, the success rate of advancing to become a sorcerer would still far exceed those who had no one to rely on. However, the sorcerer world was fair. Those younger generation sorcerers who were immersed in a honeypot would not be able to increase their success rate to 100% no matter how many resources they spent. It would be difficult for them to even reach 80%. Therefore, having a mountain behind him could indeed increase the success rate by a lot, but there was still more than a 20% chance of failure. As for those sorcerer apprentices who had nothing, as long as they reached the standard of a quasi-sorcerer, they would have a 15% chance of succeeding in one go. Thus, no one dared to underestimate any quasi-shaman. Who knew if that dazzling protagonist's halo would land on some unlucky fellow, allowing him to become the true master of the sorcerer world in one fell swoop? A sorcerer. Becoming a Tier 2 sorcerer was not something that could be achieved through experience and hard work. Most of the time, it required some special methods or some kind of strange talent. Otherwise, 70% of the sorcerers would not be rank 1 sorcerers, but rank 2 sorcerers. Compared to an orthodox magus like Merrill, the insect Lich Blitz's advancement speed was terrifying. From the time he had reached Tier 1 to the peak of Tier 1, it had only taken him a total of 70 years. The most direct reason for this situation was that he had been immersed in endless killing for almost his entire life. Regardless of whether it was the Goblin Plane, the Lance Plane, or the newly established Farron Plane, he had participated in all of them and played an extremely important role. It was precisely this kind of bloody training that allowed Blitz to advance at a speed that far exceeded that of an ordinary person. Although Merrill, Dacella, Gargamel, and the rest were envious, they could only shake their heads and sigh. After all, they could not imitate such a bloody life. If they forced themselves to do so, they might lose their lives in some other plane before they could increase their strength. In the banquet hall on the 3rd floor of the Wizard's Pagoda, there were only a dozen sorcerers dressed in various robes. Merrill, who had rushed back from the Goblin Plane, pulled Dacella aside and asked in a low voice about their encounters in the Farron Plane. From time to time, Merrill's gaze would sweep across the entrance of the banquet hall, obviously waiting for her teacher Grimm to arrive. As the host of the banquet, Gargamel frequently greeted the sorcerers in the hall. Beside him stood the gorgeous and graceful forest demon, who used a cold and indifferent expression to force back every female acolyte who tried to approach Gargamel. Between the two of them, a beautiful girl in a jade-green dress held the forest demon's hand tightly, her eyes filled with curiosity as she scanned the hall. She, too, had the strength of a level 1 sorcerer. Other than these few human sorcerers, the rest were probably all sorcerers of different races. Medusa and the leader of the Chimeras, Karen, were closer. The two of them occupied a corner of the hall, quietly sipping wine like the human sorcerers, and whispering to each other. The only group that could maintain the atmosphere of the banquet was the group of vampires that Mary had brought back. Soros and Winsoul were the only 2 remaining Blood Knights. They wore dazzling blood-red armor, and had a pair of curled-up blood-red bat wings on their backs. Their entire appearance was majestic and imposing. In stark contrast to them were 6 blood elves who were at Tier 1 and Tier 2. There were men and women among them, but even the male blood elves had delicate and handsome faces. It was difficult to determine their gender just by looking at their faces. These blood elves were obviously unwilling to be left out. They took the lead and danced in the hall. With their charming faces and graceful dance moves, they successfully attracted the attention of all the sorcerers present. The atmosphere of the banquet instantly became lively. Other than the orthodox sorcerers, there were 7 or 8 prospective sorcerers who could attend the banquet. Although they could not enjoy the treatment of sorcerers, they were not the main characters of this banquet. However, as a reserve force trained by their families, They could still attend a family banquet like this and experience the atmosphere and ways of interacting with sorcerers in advance. Of course, if they could use this banquet to gain the favor of a sorcerer, they would definitely have a source of resources in the future. Therefore, these male and female prospective sorcerers were all meticulously prepared and dressed up. The men were handsome and strong, while the women were delicate and lovely. They surrounded the field and chatted amiably, forming a beautiful scene in the banquet. As for the goblin merchant, Cabby, he was an active member of the banquet. Relying on its experience as Grimm's follower, it leisurely wandered among different small circles and groups. He used the passion of a goblin merchant to converse with everyone, talking cheerfully and wittily, as if he was the main character of the banquet. The ones in charge of serving the entire banquet were a group of specially selected female acolytes, as well as a few especially docile servants from another world, the forest elves. It had to be said that there would always be some who were especially stubborn and conservative in any group, but there would also be some who knew how to adapt. This batch of forest elves had only been transported to the blazing flame monarch for less than half a day, and some of them had already accepted their new identities. They wore slave collars and seriously took on the role of elven maids. This was actually their wisdom. Almost all of the forest elves that Grimm had transported back from Faern were fighters, and there was no lack of Grade 2 powerhouses among them. In another plane, they might be the nobles of the nobles, but here, they were nothing more than delicate dolls in the hands of the sorcerers. If they were more docile, they might be able to live longer. If they continued to be stubborn, they would end up on the dissection table or in the laboratory. Of course, it was common for evil magi with special fetishes to turn them into sex slaves or keep them as specimens. Finally, halfway through the banquet, Grimm, who was dressed in black magus robes, and Magus Mary, who was dressed up nicely, entered the banquet hall together. Behind the two of them were Dragonman Zachary and the Goblin Tigul. The arrival of the 4 Grade 2 Magi from the family immediately pushed the atmosphere of the banquet to a climax. All the Magi from the family stopped chatting and dancing, standing and applauding in unison. On the other hand, the young quasi-sorcerers surrounding the scene clapped their hands loudly. Their faces were flushed, and they were excited to see this legendary figure in their families again. It was said that this Crimson Tribe leader was a powerful figure who had climbed to Grade 2 with his own strength. He had risen to power in the Swamp Tower and made a name for himself in the dark caves. He was especially adept at controlling elemental puppets. He had once defeated a quasi-magus as a high-ranked acolyte, and as a quasi-magus, he had turned the entire volcano world upside down. However, what showed this legendary figure the most was a secret battle that no one knew about. 3 young magi who had just leveled up, with their lives in their hands, had actually turned the situation around and killed the evil magus who had wanted to sacrifice the 3 of them. This had also become his most famous battle. From then on, he could not be stopped. From a lonely and nameless ordinary magus, he quickly grew to become an extremely powerful elite magus. Fire Demon, similar titles appeared on him again and again, each time indicating the fall of a powerful enemy. Along the way, he had successfully established his own magus tower in the dark forest. As for his subsequent adventures in other planes, his summoning of powerful dragon beasts to slaughter the vampire family, and his successful return from the other plane, each of these events firmly marked the rise of a powerful figure. To be honest, why were the magi, quasi-magi, and acolytes present here? It was to be able to rely on this powerful magus and enjoy some of the benefits of war that normal people could not hope to obtain. If the Crimson family rose to power under the leadership of this legendary leader, then those who joined earlier would be able to obtain more resources and benefits. Chapter 722. The appearance of Grimm and Mary immediately set off the first wave of excitement in the family banquet. Grimm was not a physique refinement sorcerer, so he did not have monstrous muscles that were as hard as iron. However, with a height of 2 meters and a well-proportioned body, he had an almost perfect body. Strong and firm muscles, dark red and glossy skin, and a strange tattoo that covered his neck. Grim stood proudly, his dark red hair hanging loosely behind him, almost reaching his waist. Coupled with the red glow in his black eyes, he exuded a demonic, mysterious, and wise sorcerer aura. Mary, who was holding hands with him, was also very charming at this moment. She was a mature and beautiful peerless beauty. Mary's face was exquisite and perfect, with a strong three-dimensional sense. A lazy and satisfied smile hung on her small red lip. A pair of sparkling red eyes were like 2 pure and flawless rubies embedded in her exquisite face, making her look exceptionally charming and enchanting. Mary did not have the habit of wearing armor, so most of her white and tender skin was exposed. Her sexy and hot body was simply wrapped in a thin red chiffon dress. The chiffon dress was not big, and the upper part could only cover a small part of her snow-white flesh. The lower part was shrunk to above her knees, revealing most of her smooth, round, and jade-like legs. Rather than saying that this kind of clothing was covering, it was more of a different kind of temptation. It was difficult to associate such a beautiful girl with a powerful and evil sorcerer just by looking at her appearance. However, the small and exquisite dark red bat wings on Mary's back, as well as her blood-red eyes, constantly reminded others of her identity. This was like a taboo and dangerous thrilling game. Step by step, she tempted others to forget themselves and throw themselves into her beautiful burning flame. For some reason, seeing such a handsome, robust, and refined legendary sorcerer walking hand in hand with Mary, all the women present could not help but feel a sense of loss and disappointment while staring at them in a daze. If only they were the ones holding hands with Grim. How wonderful would that be? Mary's blood-red eyes slowly swept across the audience, and a faint smile once again appeared on her lips. However, as her eyes swept across, the people who were absent-minded broke free from their stupor and hurriedly applauded and offered their blessings with smiles. Just now, when their spiritual power came into contact with Mary's bloody and intense spiritual power, they suddenly retreated like snow rabbits that had encountered a ferocious wolf. It was only at this moment that they realized that the person they were jealous of was a genuine rank 2 magus. If he angered the other party and punished him harshly, no one present would be able to protect or save him. "You're quite charming." Mary walked gracefully as she communicated with Grim telepathically. I sensed a trace of murderous intent from the eyes of those girls. Grim had a faint smile on his face as he nodded to the people present. He secretly transmitted his voice to them. "I'm a very conservative person. If you continue to wear such revealing clothes, I'll spank your butt when we get back." "Let's fight then, it's not like you haven't fought before." Although he said that, a red mist surged around Mary's body. In the blink of an eye, that sexy and revealing red dress was replaced by an exquisite red evening gown. Even Grim, who was very close to her, did not manage to catch her movements and methods. "I'll say this first, I'll listen to you this time. When we get back, you have to play Queen's game with me." Mary rolled her eyes and immediately came up with a new idea. Grim laughed heartily, his tall and sturdy body emitting a domineering aura. "All right, as long as you can beat me, I'll listen to you." Mary immediately went berserk. Grim calmly let go of Mary's dangerous little hand and strode to the center of the hall, clapping his hands twice. Seeing that the family head had something to say, the noise in the hall immediately died down. Everyone held their breaths and focused their attention on this legendary figure. "All Magi of the Crimson family, as the family head, I need to drink 3 cups with everyone today. We've experienced so many planar wars, and some of the familiar figures by our side have left forever. This first cup is a toast to those who have sacrificed their lives for the family. To Sabrina, to Ender." With that, Grim downed the wine in his cup in one gulp. "To Sabrina, to Ender." The Magi all responded loudly and downed the wine in one gulp with solemn expressions. The maids hurriedly walked around the hall and refilled the cups of the Magi. This second cup of wine is a toast to all of you. It is because of your hard work and careful planning that the Crimson family has the possibility of steadily advancing. To everyone. With that, Grimm downed the wine in one gulp. All the sorcerers had excited smiles on their faces as they drank to their heart's content. This third cup of wine is for a beautiful future. I believe that with everyone's hard work, the Crimson family, as well as every single one of us, will achieve our dreams and walk towards glory. The Magi all responded in unison and raised their cups to drink. Among them, the gnome cabbie's shrill voice was the most prominent. Taking advantage of the crowd's excitement and the rising atmosphere, Grimm loudly announced the internal rewards for the Magi of the family. This time, the Farron plain had returned with a bountiful harvest. Though the losses were great, the gains were not small either. This was the perfect opportunity for the Magi of the family to share in the profits of the war. The Magi who had participated in the planar war had gained 4 to 5 times more than the Magi who had stayed behind. There were also opportunities to collect personal spoils and resources on the battlefield. Hence, once the list of battle results was announced, it was clear who was the core of the family and who was the fringe. It had to be said that the ones who had gained the most in the Farron plain were Mary and Bliss. Both of them had led their troops to attack a path, creating the best battlefield environment for the main force of the family to attack the central mountain range. As a rank 2 vampire sorceress with so many powerful servants, no one would find it strange that she was at the top of the list of battle results. However, as a rank 1 magus, Bug Lich Bliss had actually suppressed 2 other rank 2 Magi and was ranked second only to Mary. This was undoubtedly out of everyone's expectations. Grimm announced that Bliss would also become a core magus of the Crimson family and would enjoy the basic benefits of a rank 2 magus in advance. This also showed that Grimm was optimistic about Bug Lich Bliss development and was prepared to nurture him to become the family's 6th rank 2 magus. After hearing all this, all the Magi and prospective Magi of the family could not help but look at Bliss with envy. They knew that from now on, this Bug Lich Bliss would also become a rising star of the Crimson family. The only thing they could do was to raise their cups to greet him. Even at the family gathering, Bug Lich Bliss wore a thick robe, not revealing a single bit of skin on his body. As he had evolved too thoroughly, there was no longer any trace of a human on his body. He looked completely like a bugman. Therefore, in order to avoid being too shocking, he could only cover himself with a thick robe wherever he went to avoid those surprised or fearful gazes. In the face of such an honor, Blitz did not feel smug at all. Instead, he used his deerskin gloves' insect pincer to raise his wine glass in return. The 2 big and 2 small eyes of the 2 ferocious insect heads, hidden in the shadow of the hood, emitted a breathtaking green fluorescence. As a participant in the conquest of the Farron plain, Bliss knew very well that the family's purpose in entering this plain was not for the so-called resources or plunder, but for the witches of destiny in the Arctic North. After this battle, the amount of resources and captives they obtained were secondary. The main goal was to help Alice advance to rank 2 and allow the Witches of Destiny to show signs of merging with the Crimson family. Thus, the Crimson family's biggest gain this time was actually gaining the trust of the Witches of Destiny led by Alice. Thus, in a situation where it was difficult for outsiders to know, the Tower of Fate in the north had already become the Crimson family's outpost to explore the Northern Witches' territory. As a powerful rank 2 fire wizard, Grimm had the full support of the Blood Queen Mary on his left and the leader of the Witches of Destiny, Alice, on his right. Once he was given a chance to develop, he was destined to soar into the sky with an unstoppable force. It was because he deeply understood this that Bug Lich Bliss put away all the ambitions and expectations he should and should not have. He began to seriously consider his relationship with Grimm. His bug body was bestowed to him by Grimm, and the bug queen that had completely fused with his soul was also bestowed by Grimm. Thus, if Bliss had any other thoughts, it would be hard to guarantee that he would not be forcefully suppressed by Grimm. Perhaps staying in the Crimson family was not a bad choice. Just as the Crimson family was celebrating, the Tower of Destiny in the north was feeling both pain and joy. The leader of the witches, Alice, had successfully returned and successfully advanced to rank 2. This was undoubtedly something to celebrate and be happy about. However, 4 of the 7 witches of destiny who had followed her were forever slumbering in that distant foreign world. This was undoubtedly a heavy blow to the witches of destiny who had just started out. Thus, under the leadership of Ice Witch Chave and Violent Witch Sophia, the captives and spoils of war that they had captured from the foreign world were simply distributed. Alice then went to the cold astrological platform on the top floor alone. Here, in this cold and silent world, Alice hugged her knees and curled up in a corner of the hall. She looked up at the dazzling starry sky and silently shed 2 streams of tears. Chapter 723. The return of the main force of the family immediately boosted the morale of the Crimson family. In the past, in order to prevent the Wizard's Pagoda from being emptied of power and ambushed by enemies, the family had almost sealed off the blazing flame monarch's flame cave that led to the outside world. Now, of course, these problems did not exist. Hence, the blazing flame monarch, lava hall and flame cave were once again opened to the public. The troops, adventurers and sorcerers acolytes who had been waiting for a long time once again surged into the underground Wizard's Pagoda, causing the place to once again become bustling with activity. Once these outsiders entered the blazing flame monarch, they immediately discovered a few differences from before. Firstly, the defensive system of the Wizard's Pagoda had become tighter. In the past, the blazing flame monarch had lacked sufficient wizard beasts, so most of the patrols and guard missions had been done by the chimeras and warning spell formations. Now, however, these heavy and trivial tasks had been handed over to some strange metal magical equipment. Unlike the metal puppets and constructs of the Wizard's Pagoda, these metal magical equipment had the distinct style of another world. The energy circulation system and battle system were also vastly different from the puppets and constructs of the Magus world. But no matter what, the addition of this new force meant that the blazing flame monarch's strength had grown. Secondly, a large number of natural-type treasures and unique items had appeared in the blazing flame monarch's trading system. Be it the 1,000-year tree heart, the horn of a unicorn, or a large number of enchanted longswords, elven longbows and natural-type staffs, they were all unique items. On them, one could clearly see the imprint of a massive civilization from another world. For such a large number of treasures and weapons to appear in the blazing flame monarch could only mean that the Crimson family had recently succeeded in conquering another world, and it was the lair of a natural-type creature. Some people with ulterior motives passed on this information, immediately attracting the attention of the surrounding large Magus families. From what the blazing flame monarch had shown to the outside world, it could be seen that the Crimson family had successfully conquered at least 2 to 3 different worlds. More importantly, they did not seem to have suffered many losses. At the very least, the few prominent figures of the Crimson family were all present, and there were no obvious losses in the family. This was actually what the other families were most confused about. Any Magus family that had tried would understand the difficulty of conquering another world. With the power of a small sorcerer family, wanting to devour an entire plane in a faraway foreign world was something that everyone knew about. More than 10 magi were sent over. Not to mention occupying the entire plane, even establishing a firm stronghold would be difficult. If they were careless and were surrounded by the natives of the plane, they would often be completely annihilated. On the surface, the Crimson family only had 7 or 8 magi, and most of them were rank 1 magi. What kind of methods did they use to obtain victory after victory? Luck? The enemy is weak? Powerful reinforcements? Because of this confusion, a few nearby Magus families couldn't help but place their attention on the newly established Crimson family. It would have been better if they did not understand, but once they did, these Magus families could not help but be shocked. They did not know when it started, but the Crimson family, which had always been weak in their hearts, actually had 9 rank 2 magi. The head of the Crimson family, Grim, was a rank 2 fire magus, the Blood Queen, Magus Mary, was a vampire magus, the Dragonman Zachary was a rank 2 magic warrior, and the Goblin Tigul could control a rank 2 Goblin Ripper. Apart from them, the Crimson family suddenly had 2 rank 2 Blood Knights and 3 rank 2 Blood Elves. Although these strange magical creatures could not compare to orthodox Tier 2 sorcerers, they were still a terrifying force when they gathered together. Compared to the rank 2 magi, the Crimson family had fewer rank 1 magi. Earth Element Magus Merrill, mid rank 1, Insect Lich Bliss, peak rank 1, Wind Wizard Desira, early rank 1, Medusa, high rank 1, Manticore Karen, high rank 1, Potion Master Gargamel, mid rank 1, Forest Demon Ava, mid rank 1, Nature Element Magus Amelia, early rank 1, Goblin Cabby, early rank 1, Old Fox Venlier, mid rank 1, 6 Blood Elves, early rank 1. In any Magus family, the number of rank 1 magi was the highest, while the number of rank 2 magi, who were the main fighting force, was much lower. But this did not seem to be the case in the Crimson family. The number of rank 2 members in the Crimson family seemed to be slightly higher than the number of rank 1 members. This was simply too inconceivable. Also, most Magus families would desperately expand their territory, using wizards' pagodas, resource points, family castles and other facilities to control more people and land. Only then would they be able to discover more students with talent, and then establish a complete and systematic system to nurture magi. But the Crimson family was very strange. Not only was their base in the Black Forest, there were no people or land around them that they could control. Even the magi of the family lived in seclusion, rarely leaving the small wizard's pagoda deep underground. As a result, the Crimson family and the nearby Magus families seemed to be at odds, as if they were carriages on 2 parallel lines. If one did not deliberately try to understand and eavesdrop, it would be difficult for them to have any interactions. But with the increase in the family's strength, there was no longer a need to maintain their previous mysteriousness and aloofness. If the family wanted to develop, and the Magi wanted to advance, they could not do without resources and knowledge. Relying on the family to passively collect these would undoubtedly become abnormally slow, and it would also affect the progress of the Magi in the family. Thus, with Grimm's approval, a large number of natural treasures, unique items, weapons, and a batch of forest elf slaves appeared at the Blazing Flame Monarch auction. Under the management of the gnome Cabby, they successfully attracted many slave merchants and family representatives from the scattered Tower Forest region, slowly but clearly increasing the family's strength. The Blazing Flame Monarch was no longer the remote enclave that lacked resources and materials. Instead, it had become a popular place in the central Alobes region of the continent. With the Blazing Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda at the front, the land between it and Pine Tower Town became familiar land. The small paths in the forest gradually became flat roads, and the wild beasts and small magical creatures that resided here were all killed by the teams of monster hunters and adventurers that swarmed over. Therefore, small settlements began to appear one after another, gradually developing into human villages and towns. The Black Forest of the past gradually retreated to the north, returning the 200 miles of forest around the Blazing Flame Monarch and to the south to the humans. However, according to the agreement between Grimm and the Scattered Tower Forest Parliament, this newly developed land would belong to the Parliament. The Parliament would send suitable people to become the new leader of this land. While the Magi of the Crimson family were dissatisfied with this, none of them dared to speak out in public due to the reputation of the Scattered Tower Forest Society. Deep in winter, An exquisite noble's carriage traveled slowly on the road in the forest. The last ray of sunlight at the end of the horizon sank into the dark sea of trees, causing the forest road to become increasingly dark and sinister. Even though most of the large carnivorous beasts in the surrounding forest had been chased away, it was still extremely dangerous to walk here alone at night. Wilms lifted the curtains of the carriage and gazed into the distance at the dark forest, silently falling into deep thought. The cold wind of the night blew along the forest road, chilling him to the bone. He could not help but shiver. Wilms wrapped the exquisite noble's cloak tightly around his body, covering the equally gorgeous and exquisite armor beneath. As the eldest son of the Unveil family, he was a noble with the title of a baron. He had also learned some horse riding and fighting techniques from the knights, so he was not a weak and useless noble. At this moment, a mournful howl of a wolf suddenly sounded from the depths of the forest, causing him to become even more bewildered. "Jom, will we be able to reach the blazing flame monarch tonight?" Finally, after a long and lonely journey, he could not help but ask this childish question to the coachman cum butler who had followed him for many years. "My lord, I'm afraid we won't be able to make it tonight." The coachman, Jom, exhaled a gust of hot air to warm his hands. He said softly, "There's still over 40 kilometers of mountain roads before we reach the blazing flame monarch. I'm afraid we'll have to stop at Goat Horn village for the night." Goat Horn village. The moment he heard such a vulgar and lowly name, he knew that it had to be a simple village with nothing but a few tattered straw huts and a charred fire pit. This also meant that there would be no warm and comfortable guest rooms, no sweet and delicious bread and hot soup, and no beautiful ladies who could make him feel happy. Wilms became restless again. Once again, he felt restless about the mission he had to carry on his back. He sighed helplessly and let down the curtain, blocking the cold air outside the carriage. After he calmed down, Wilms fished out the simple and elegant magic parchment from his bosom and slowly unfurled it. Then, lines of exquisite words written in magic ink on the parchment came into view. "I hereby appoint the eldest son of the Unveil family, Baron Wilms, to head to the XXX region to take over all the land, minerals, and people there. He will become the undisputed new lord of that region." At the end of the parchment was the unique magic seal of the Scattered Pagoda Union and the spell imprints of the two elders. Chapter 724. Blazing Flame Monarch, Level 3. In a secret magic room, Gargamel, the Crimson Chief Butler, was listening to his subordinate's report with a gloomy expression. The cute wizard girl, Amelia, was sitting next to him, playing with an exquisite nature pendant in boredom. His 5 subordinates were dressed in the attire of mercenaries and adventurers. It was obvious that they'd chosen to rely on the Scarlet family's external organizations. At the corner of the secret room was a sinister fellow draped in black robes. He stood in the darkness where light could not reach, silent like a block of wood. "He's the eldest son of the Unveil family, and has the first line of succession. When he left the Scattered Tower Forest Union, he was even received by an elder of the association, but we don't know what they talked about. 2 magi from the family came with him, and they're both only at rank 1. It's said that he has a proof of identity issued by the association. He's currently hurrying to the Blazing Flame Monarch, and might be staying the night in Goat Horn village." The subordinates spoke one after another, all the information revolving around the new leader of the association who was about to take up his post. As the human settlement slowly took shape, the honeymoon period between the Blazing Flame Monarch and the Scattered Tower Forest Union officially came to an end. For a long time to come, the Scattered Tower Forest Union would choose to bully the Blazing Flame Monarch, forcing them to obediently join the association and become a member. This was obviously not in line with the development plans set by the family leader, Grimm. Of course, it was unlikely that a lame provocation would happen. However, once the new leader took up his post and maintained hostility towards the Blazing Flame Monarch, the Scarlet family's replenishment and resource transactions would be greatly affected. This was probably one of the Scattered Tower Forest Union's strategies. If the Scattered Pagoda Forest Association did not choose a suitable leader, then the Crimson family represented by the Blazing Flame Monarch would use the advantage of the Wizard's Pagoda to extend the family's influence to every piece of land and every person in the Alobis region. From then on, any human or magical creature that wanted to live and develop here would have to listen to the Scarlet family's wishes. Without the Scarlet family's approval, it would be difficult for them to gain a foothold here. However, once the new lord dispatched by the Scattered Taro Forest Association appeared in the Alovis region, the Crimson family could only restrict their influence to a radius of 10 kilometers around the Blazing Flame Monarch. This would undoubtedly cause them to lose the forest resources close to 200 kilometers south of the Blazing Flame Monarch. Furthermore, this part of the dark forest had been continuously purified by the Wizard's Pagoda, and it was no longer a threat to humans. It was basically a mature land that was most suitable for development. It was a huge loss to the Crimson family to just throw it away. Furthermore, the Blazing Flame Monarch had ventured deep into the dark forest, and the territory behind her didn't belong to her. Instead, it belonged to a human noble who held deep enmity towards her. This would undoubtedly make the Crimson family very uncomfortable. They used a human noble to block the Crimson family's only path to the outside world, using this method to slowly torture this new Magus family. If the Crimson family couldn't take it anymore and chose to retaliate, then the Scattered Tower Forest Association, hidden behind the scenes, would jump out as a peacemaker. Of course, no matter how they mediated, the final result would not be beneficial to the Crimson family. Anyway, there were plenty of human nobles. The Crimson family could kill them all they wanted. After killing them, the Crimson family would probably have to pay an unimaginably high price. Thus, as an obstacle sent by the Scattered Tower Forest Association to pressure the Crimson family, this new leader was undoubtedly extremely pitiful. He was destined to pay with his life in order to obtain some benefits for the Scattered Tower Forest Association that they couldn't obtain on the surface. Thus, the Crimson family that had received the news beforehand were filled with hatred and disgust towards the arrival of this new leader. However, this pitiful fellow was just a random bait that the other party had thrown out. Killing him would only allow the Scattered Tower Forest Association to find a suitable entry point in the Alobis region. If they really allowed the Scattered Tower Forest Association to extend their dark hands into this region, it would undoubtedly be detrimental to the Crimson family's long-term development. Thus, even if the new leader was just an ordinary noble, Gargamel still had to treat him with caution as the great manager of the Crimson family. "Father, if you don't like that human leader, I can just kill him. Why are you so troubled?" Amelia, who was sitting at the side, asked, confused. She looked like a 15 or 16-year-old human girl, but she didn't seem nervous or cautious when she talked about killing people. It was as if she was having afternoon tea and was at ease. "He can't be killed so easily." Gargamel sighed helplessly. "Perhaps he's insignificant, but the Undul family he belongs to is a subsidiary of one of the 5 great Magus families in the Scattered Tower Forest, the Brabant family. Once the cause of death is investigated, the other party will have an excuse to extend their dark hands into our Crimson family's territory. Then we'll create some trouble for him and make it impossible for him to establish a foothold here." Amelia said disdainfully, "Those human nobles are all lazy and extravagant fellows. The environment here is so bad, let's see how long he can last." Gargamel deeply agreed with his daughter's suggestion. The Magi were well aware of the morals of the human nobles. It was simply wishful thinking for them to start from scratch like the poor peasants. After hundreds and thousands of years of solidification, the ruling order established by the Magi could not be resisted by the peasants who did not have any extraordinary powers. Thus, as the lackeys of the Magi, The human nobles became the cream of the crop and enjoyed a luxurious life that ordinary people could not imagine. Baron Wilms, as the first in line to inherit the family, was actually sent to this place. It made people suspect that he might have become a victim of his family's infighting and was thrown out like a chess piece. There were also 2 magi from the family who came with him, which confirmed Gargamel's suspicions. With the protection of the magi, it was even more impossible for Wilms to die from an accident or the jaws of a wild beast in the forest. In the entire Elobes region, only the Crimson family had the power to kill him under the protection of 2 magi. They couldn't kill him, but they couldn't allow him to do as he pleased here and reduce the Crimson family's actual control. Gargamel's brows wrinkled for a moment before he coldly smiled. "Take these. Remember, think of a way to put them in the new lord's food. 1 a day for a month." Gargamel took out a small potion bottle and threw it to one of his subordinates dressed as a thief. Seeing the other party's hesitant expression, Gargamel immediately comforted him. "Don't worry, this is not poison. As long as it's in the food, even the 2 magi won't be able to detect anything." As for anything else, Gargamel did not say much to his subordinates. Amelia, who was at the side, sniffed a few times and quickly identified the effects of the potion based on the smell in the air. Hypnotic potion. This was a type of magic potion refined from hallucinogenic grass. Taking it once or twice would not cause any harm to the human body. Instead, it would make the person feel relaxed and unfettered. Taking it too many times would easily cause the recipient to develop a dependence on the mind and become addicted to the drug. Of course, this negligible side effect was useless to magi, but to humans who had weaker control over their spiritual force, it was terrifying. If not for today's matter, with Gargamel's status as a potion master, it would be impossible for him to refine such a potion for a mortal. Only this kind of potion could avoid the Magi's poison detection and be successfully sent into Baron Wilm's mouth. After dealing with the matters regarding the new lord, a few of his subordinates reported the latest situation in the Black Forest to the north of the Blazing Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda. According to the feedback from the troops and adventurers, a group of evil eyes had appeared near the Misty Mountains. There were about 200 of them, and they occupied an underground karst cave there, frequently coming out to harass the area in the Crystal Canyon. They also discovered a few crystal mines of decent quality. However, there was a group of harpies gathered there. There were not many of them, only about 100 or so, but they were more than enough to deal with the average adventurer team, the group of twin-legged flying dragons and the twin-legged flying dragon king that were entrenched near the Blazing Flame Monarch knew that they were powerless against the Magi, and were forced to move deeper into the Black Forest. After a few years of searching and scouting, the new nest of the twin-legged flying dragons was found by the adventurers. As the great supervisor of the Crimson family, Gargamel had to take care of all the trivial matters. However, there was no other way. The Crimson family was rich in combat magi, and all the magi in the family either hid in their residences or laboratories, or ran around in search of necessary knowledge and resources. To be honest, there were few magi who could be as diligent and conscientious as Gargamel, spending so much time on mundane matters. Precisely because he understood that Gargamel's position was irreplaceable, even the magi of the family who were of a higher rank than him had to be polite to him, not daring to show the slightest bit of disrespect. Grimm understood the importance of Gargamel's existence, and even specially sent a group of 30 metal magic weapons to protect him. This made it so that when Gargamel went out to handle matters, he would be surrounded by a large group of metal magic weapons. It was an indescribably flashy sight. Chapter 725. Blazing Flame Monarch, Level 4. Grimm was bent over his workbench, silently scribbling something on a piece of parchment. After experiencing the war in another plane, Grimm had once again realized his lack of magic equipment. After becoming a Grade 2 Magus, He had been busy running around all day and did not have the time to collect fire elemental equipment that was suitable for his use. This had unknowingly lowered his battle prowess. Every time an elemental magus wanted to raise their rank, they had to accumulate knowledge and train their spiritual force over a long period of time. This was to allow their spiritual force and physical body to be in sync. This was the only way they could unleash their battle prowess to the fullest. However, the amount of time needed to achieve this was so long that it could cause one to collapse. Hence, many magi could only place their hopes on gathering suitable magic equipment in order to greatly increase their strength in a short period of time. A suitable magic equipment could often multiply a magus battle prowess. Many combat magi who obtained a suitable magic equipment would even slightly adjust their techniques in order to unleash the power of the magic equipment to a greater extent, increasing their compatibility with the magic equipment. In the past, Grimm and the others had mainly fought against the natives of other planes, so they did not have a deep understanding of this. However, once the focus of the family was shifted back to the Magus world, with Grimm's current equipment grade, it would not be as easy for him to gain an advantage against magi of the same rank. When they were still grade 1 magi, their spiritual force was not enough to support their unbridled battles. The proportion and weight of some forces outside of oneself became more and more important. Back then, Grimm had the support of magic puppets and could often outnumber his opponents, allowing him to gain the upper hand in battles between magi of the same rank. However, after becoming a grade 2 magus, the frequency of battles between magi of the same rank had decreased significantly. After all, grade 2 magi were the main fighting force of any family or organization. Once a battle broke out between them, it would have a huge impact on themselves, the environment, and the organizations behind them. Hence, unless they had no other choice, the chances of a battle between grade 2 magi were much lower than between grade 1 magi. For example, when Grimm had helped Mary deal with a Tier 2 vampire family, the result of which was a blood feud between the vampire family and Grimm. Even the Crimson family's wizards had to be careful when they went out. They were afraid that the news would be leaked, and they would become the target of the vampire family's revenge. In the past few days, Grimm had learned about the strength of the Sorcerer World's grade 2 sorcerers. He was surprised to find that even with the help of the terrifying Balrog, his strength was only below average. This was partly because he had accumulated too little knowledge and resources, but more importantly, it was because he did not transform the knowledge and resources he had mastered into basic strength. Therefore, Grimm took advantage of this rare free time to study and understand the information the AI chip had gathered and organized. He began to think about how he could optimize the allocation of resources and turn them into his own battle prowess. After thinking for a while, Grimm realized that he should dig deeper into the application of elemental magic puppets. In the past, the elemental puppets were more like portable elemental puppets. They could be released in battle and given a few commands. Their performance in battle was almost completely controlled by the AI chip. Now that he had the knowledge of runes from the Night Plane and the magic machinery technology from the Goblin Plane, Grimm had an urge to combine them. Previously, Grimm had thought of creating a special construct that combined the advantages of elemental magic puppets and metal magic machinery, metal magic puppets. However, due to the limitations of special magic alloys, he could not derive them. Hence, he could only find another way and put his attention on external magic machinery armors. After living 2 lives, the mechanical Gundam of his previous world had left a deep impression on him. Now that he was a powerful magus in another world with the power to destroy the heavens and earth, some things that he had only dared to dream about in the past were now possible. What was a Gundam? It was just some composite external armor. Whether it was a full protective force field, a special alloy with high strength, or a myriad of weapons and equipment, these were no longer unrealistic fantasies. They were small problems that could be solved with complex alchemy and superb forging technique. In the past, the controllers of the Gundams were weak humans, which was why they needed the most protection. Now that Grimm was a powerful elemental magus, he did not need to spend so much effort on physical protection. Instead, if he really wanted to create external armors, he would need to consider how to maximize the elemental strength of the host body. Hence, after looking through most of the relevant information, Grimm finally gave the AI chip the command to research on the Gundam of another world. Beep. Receiving host's latest command. Beginning to search for information on the exoskeleton composite auxiliary combat equipment. Beep. According to the data in the database, the exoskeleton composite auxiliary combat equipment will have the following basic abilities. Host may add or remove them according to his needs. Beep. Life System Circulation System. Using the host's human race as a template, create a complete life system within the equipment to support the host's ability to survive in various harsh environments. Beep. Battlefield Information Collection System. Allow the equipment to investigate and collect the necessary information on the battlefield. Beep. Battlefield Command Platform. Host can rely on this platform to complete dynamic command of the entire battlefield. Beep. Body Function Strengthening System. Using magic machinery to construct the exoskeleton framework, using runes to construct the energy circulation system, strengthening the basic attributes of a certain part of the body. Beep. Energy Amplification System. Using magic abilities to amplify the power of the foreign world, increasing the strength of the host's energy attacks. A series of beeping sounds reverberated in Grimm's mind. Grimm repeatedly thought about his original intentions and the knowledge and resources he had now, trying his best to weigh the effects of each of the AI chip's suggestions on the final product. In short, the more functions he added to the auxiliary combat equipment, the more the various systems needed to be coordinated, and the more terrifying the knowledge and resources they would require. With Grimm's current situation, trying to be greedy would be a dead end. If he added all the functions, the AI chip could indeed design a powerful auxiliary combat equipment for him. However, many of the knowledge and resources were not available to him immediately. It would probably take him more than 100 years just to collect these resources and knowledge. Therefore, after careful consideration, Grimm felt that it would be better for him to start from scratch and start with the simplest version. AI chip, remove all unnecessary functions, and only keep the basic body strengthening and energy amplification system. Give me a few usable models. Beep. Received command. Beginning to infer the basic model of the auxiliary combat equipment based on current data, Grimm slowly closed his eyes and emptied his mind. He poured all his spiritual force into the AI chip, using it to calculate the data and construct the models. Finally, after 7 hours, 24 minutes and 51 seconds, the AI chip finally projected a few strange equipment models in Grimm's mind. Beep. Based on data analysis, there are 3,719 types of equipment that meet the host's requirements. Removing the overly high requirements, there are 586 types left. Removing the knowledge and resources that I have yet to master, there are 17 types left. Removing the unnecessary functions, there are 2 types left. With the AI chips filtering and searching, the strange equipment and mecha in Grimm's mind began to disappear one after another. In the end, only the 2 strange items were left, spinning slowly. Grimm's attention first shifted to the equipment on the left. Following his gaze, a bright beam of light illuminated the equipment from top to bottom, allowing Grimm to clearly see every detail of it. This was a strange equipment that resembled metal armor. There were small magical devices within the golden breastplate, and the devices relied on runes to communicate with each other. Every time Grimm's gaze fell on a certain part of the strange armor, the basic decomposition diagram and energy circulation diagram would be magnified several times, allowing him to see them clearly. This set of armor had +3 to all attributes, and the terrifying ability to increase fire magic damage by 45%. However, to achieve this, the only magic alloy that could be used to create this armor was the Kalos alloy that Grimm had obtained from the Goblin Plane. Looking at the weight of this armor, it was likely that he would need to use all the remaining Kalos alloy to complete it. This also meant that Grimm would not be able to create another magical furnace or spatial furnace until he found a new replacement for the magical alloy. Grimm's fiery gaze lingered on the strange armor for a long time before he reluctantly shifted his gaze away. Following Grimm's gaze, the second set of equipment was illuminated by the beam of light. This was not a complete set of magic equipment, but a strange set made up of 3 to 5 independent small pieces of equipment. What Grimm saw was a crown, a bracelet, a belt, a pair of boots, and a pendant. Each of them had their own unique attributes and magic effect. When they were pieced together, they could form a complete set of magic equipment. Chapter 726. Blazing Corona, Rank 2 Magic Type Crown. Increases magic resistance by 10 points, fire resistance plus 20 points. Wearer will have a fire barrier dealing 40 points of fire damage per second. Blazing Emblem, Rank 2 Magic Type Bracelet. Increases magic resistance by 5 points, fire resistance by 10 points. Wearer will have a flame shaping ability, able to shape elemental flames into any shape or form. Fearless, Rank 2 Magic Type Belt. Increases magic resistance by 5 points, fire resistance by 10 points. Wearer will have a flame summoning ability, able to summon a certain number of fire elemental creatures from the fire elemental plane. Ashes, Rank 2 Magic Type Boot. Increases magic resistance by 5 points, fire resistance by 10 points. Wearer will have a flame recovery ability, able to maintain a doubling of HP regeneration within magical flames. Fire Dragon's Breath, Rank 2 Magic Type Accessory. Increases magic resistance by 5 points, fire resistance by 10 points. Wearer will be able to release the fire energy condensed within the pendant in one go, forming a fan-shaped shockwave in front of the wearer. The Blazing Flame Monarch set was made up of 5 parts, each of which was at least rank 2 and had a certain amount of magic abilities. Once they were put together, they would even have some unique set abilities. 2-piece set, Fire Resistance. 3-piece set, halves the spiritual force consumption of fire spells. 4-piece set, all fire spells of the wearer will have an additional rank 2 spell effect, spell penetration, spell critical strike, spell range increase. 5-piece set, once the set is complete, it will automatically form a burning domain. All non-fire elemental spells within 50 meters of the wearer will be forbidden. Anyone who casts a spell within the burning domain will temporarily forget the spell after the spell is successfully cast. All individuals who move within the burning domain will suffer a penalty of being ignited. Looking at the densely packed attributes of the set, Grimm could not help but swallow his saliva. Individually, these rank 2 equipment were not very powerful. However, once they were combined into a set, Grimm could not help but drool at the sight of the various strange abilities that could be unleashed. This was the best solution that the AI chip had given Grimm after summarizing all the data. Grimm already had the knowledge to craft these rank 2 artifacts, and the required resources were all within his capabilities. Therefore, when Grimm shifted his gaze from the equipment to the long list of resources, he could not help but hold his breath. What a long resource list! On it, Grimm saw the names of countless rare resources. The quantity and unit price marked at the back made his brain lack oxygen. He felt dizzy and found it difficult to breathe. Stifling his fear, Grimm flipped to the end of the list of resources and saw the total cost of the set, 1,350,000 magic crystals. In order to forge such a Tier 2 magic tool set, just the cost of the basic resources alone was as high as 1,350,000 mana crystals. This did not include the corresponding price of witchcraft knowledge, as well as the loss of failure in the refining process. For the first time, Grimm understood how important knowledge and resources were to a magus. Even geniuses with extraordinary talent, if they did not have a certain amount of power and resources, they could only rely on meditation day after day, year after year, to slowly increase their spiritual force. The power that they obtained through their own hard work was not even worth mentioning when compared to those who relied on their family's power to easily obtain powerful magic tools. No matter how much effort one put in, no matter how talented one was, with the vast amount of resources and knowledge accumulated over thousands of years by a large family, they would be crushed into dregs, becoming the best footnote to the losers. At this moment, Grimm once again understood how convenient it was for him to gather knowledge and resources with a magus organization in hand. Otherwise, he could only be like most magi and go against his will to join a magus family, using his own abilities to exchange for magic crystals and basic resources. As for rare resources and high-grade knowledge, he could only rely on adventuring in the dark forest or conquering other planes to obtain them. Otherwise, the exorbitant prices would be enough to crush any independent magus who had no one to rely on. If he did not want to take risks, he could only rely on a long period of service to slowly gather the necessary knowledge and resources. This was undoubtedly a huge waste of time and energy. Hence, looking at the basic models of the magic tools that the AI chip had calculated based on the data, Grimm did not see individual magic tools, but a mountain of magic crystals that he could not climb. If Grimm wanted to forcefully create the blazing flame monarch, he would probably have to squeeze out all the resources of the Crimson family. Hence, it was impossible to achieve in the short term. The only realistic option was to choose one or two parts of the magic tool set and create them first to increase his own battle prowess. Then, when the family's financial situation was better, he would create the rest of the parts. How should he choose? Grimm's burning gaze wandered around the 5 magic tools, gritting his teeth as he considered his choice. In comparison, the burning corona had the highest resistance amongst the 5 pieces, and it was obviously the core equipment of the set. However, the flame barrier it came with overlapped with Grimm's spells. If the two could not be combined, the cost-effectiveness of choosing the burning corona would be much lower. As for the fearless belt, its most obvious ability was to summon a group of fire creatures. However, this ability could be replaced by an elemental puppet, so it could not complement Grimm's current abilities. Excluding these two, the remaining items were much easier to choose. Grimm only needed to choose between the Flame Emblem armband, the ash leather boots, and the Fire Dragon's breath pendant. After pondering for a long time, Grimm finally made up his mind and chose the Flame Emblem armband and the ash leather boot. He had already grasped quite a number of offensive spells, and a free rank 2 Dragon's Breath spell was not enough to pique his interest. Instead, the strange abilities of the 2 magic tools made him look forward to them. To create the Flame Emblem and the ash leather boots, he estimated that they would cost 460,000 magic crystals. He also needed to purchase some fire dragon's skin, top-grade fire agate, and a special magical metal called fire-loathing iron. Grimm did not lack top-grade fire agate. He had plundered it from the rank 2 green dragon Augu's lair in the Fairn Plain. The fire-loathing iron, on the other hand, was more troublesome. It was a special magical material produced from the depths of volcanoes and soaked in the blood of fire-type creatures for a long time. As it was difficult to produce in the natural world, it could only be found in the laboratories of high-ranked alchemists. Hence, if Grimm needed it, he could only send people to the various large factions in the Forest of Towers to purchase it. Of course, he could also purchase it from the Silver Alliance's trading or auction houses in the central part of the continent. However, the price was proportional to its rarity. As for the last item, the fire dragon's skin, it was the most troublesome for Grimm. It was already difficult to find large dragons in the Magus world, not to mention pure-blooded fire dragons. Since he wanted to create a rank 2 magic tool, the fire dragon's skin was the most suitable. However, even if Grimm mobilized all the rank 2 magi in his family, he might not be able to deal with a rank 2 fire dragon. After all, dragons were widely acknowledged to be powerful, and it would not be a problem for them to take on multiple of them. Furthermore, if they could not win, the dragons were not stupid. They would flap their wings and fly away, and it would be extremely difficult for Grimm and the others to stop them. In the Crimson family, the only ones who could face a rank 2 fire dragon head-on were Draconian Zacha and Tigula's Goblin Ripper. However, Draconian Zacha was a half-blood draconian and was naturally affected by the might of dragons. If he were to face a rank 2 dragon head-on, Zacha's legs would probably turn to jelly before the fight even started. This was not because he was not brave enough, but because his half-dragon bloodline was naturally restrained by dragons. As for the other meat shield, the Goblin Ripper, its heavy metal body could move nimbly on the ground, but when it flew into the sky, it was no different from a clumsy bear. If it flew into the sky to intercept a dragon, the scene would definitely be hilarious. In the Crimson family, the only ones who could match the dragons in speed and flight were Mary and the Blood Knights and Blood Elves she had formed. However, these fellows were all fake rank 2 creatures. They had the stats of a rank 2 creature, but did not have much combat power. In addition, vampires had a natural flaw that was hard to make up for, and that was their fragile skin and weak blood. If they met such powerful magic creatures, a large dragon's breath would be enough to wipe them out in an instant. Hence, when fighting against dragons in the past, Grimm would try his best to use tactics, using the terrain and other methods to restrict his opponent's movement and flight abilities. Then, he would use speed to fight speed and defeat his opponent in a short period of time before they could react. Otherwise, when his opponent realized what was going on, they would make use of the dragon's thick skin and long blood to engage in guerrilla warfare with the Crimson Magi. At that time, the ones who would be killed would not be the dragons, but Grimm and the others. Due to these difficulties, if it were any other magus, they would probably choose something with properties similar to the dragon's skin. For example, the skin of a ground fire lizard or a flame bird. However, it just so happened that Grimm had the lance plane. Since there was a female fire dragon like the rank 3 Apocalypse Star Philibba, it should not be a problem for him to find a suitable rank 2 fire dragon. It seemed that there was a rank 2 male fire dragon among the group of dragons that had followed the female fire dragon to cause trouble in the Metal Fortress. Chapter 727. As expected, Grimm obtained the information he wanted about the rank 2 fire dragon from Gaz Lurvy. Bamu? Bulatek was a rank 2 fire dragon and the dragon lord of the Lance Plain. Its territory was located in the Burning Steppes, 30,000 kilometers away from the Stoneclaw Mountains, where the Metal Fortress was located. Truthfully, if not for Philibba's warm invitation, Grimm's influence wouldn't have spread so far in another 3 to 5 years. He wouldn't have been able to meet this Tier 2 male fire dragon so soon. Now that he had a clear goal, Grimm did not hesitate any longer and ordered Gaz Lurvy to quickly gather information on Bamu. Bulatek was a rank 2 fire dragon. At the same time, Grimm began to make appropriate preparations for this expedition. Fire dragons like these usually lived in areas with extremely harsh environments, such as the volcano world or the lava sea. No matter which it was not a place that ordinary people could easily set foot in. Fighting in such an environment would not only not affect Grimm's combat power, but it would also greatly increase. However, the other magi in the family would not be able to enjoy such treatment. The environment would greatly restrict their combat power. In order not to affect the magi in the family, they had to prepare fire resistance equipment, magic resistance potions, appropriate health potions, and healing wands in advance. Of course, if they could obtain the map of the rank 2 fire dragon's lair, they would have more confidence in the battle. Grimm handed this task to the old fox, Venlier, and the 2 Blood Knight. They set off from the Metal Fortress and sneaked all the way to the territory of the rank 2 fire dragon. They would then think of a way to capture the Dragonoid guards and interrogate them for the map of the Fire Dragon's underground palace. The task of collecting fire-resistance equipment was handed over to the Goblin Cabbie. As the future head of the Crimson family's finance department, it was his responsibility to take care of such a small matter. As for the related magic potions, they were all handed over to Gargamel. Gargamel's profession was an apothecary. As long as he had enough ingredients, it would not be a problem to satisfy the Crimson family's need. The new rank 2 Blood Elves in the family had just switched from Logia to Blood Elves and were still in the process of familiarizing themselves with their abilities. Hence, they did not participate in this expedition. Otherwise, they would definitely suffer heavy casualties. Apart from making some internal preparations, Grim was also trying his best to rope in some external help. Unfortunately, the Tier 3 Thunder Dragon, Arms, had no interest in killing its own kind, rejecting Grim's invitation without hesitation. However, Grim secretly guessed that the reason why they were not interested was purely because both Emerald Dragons and Emerald Dragons belonged to the Logia Forest dragon race. They did not like to stay in a place with only fiery red stones and no green at all. In this way, even if it helped Grim conquer the Burning Steppes and Scorching Canyon, all the spoils and territories would belong to the wizard. Although this speculation was a little malicious, it was not the correct answer based on Grim's understanding of Arms. After cutting off the support from the dragons, Grim could only place his hope on the dragon-devouring assassin, Ollie. After promising to kill the fire dragon, the wizards would only take the dragon skin and the dragon crystal. The Dragon-Eater female assassin happily accepted Grim's invitation and hurried to the Metal Fortress. While Grim and the rest of the Crimson Sorcerers were away from Lance, Ollie did not stay idle. She spent almost every day roaming around the Dragon Lord's nest. As soon as she met Grim, she strongly requested to exchange this information for the Dragon Crystal of the Tier 2 Fire Dragon. After all, to Ollie, devouring a dragon of the same rank was the most effective way to increase her strength. Without the crucial dragon crystal, the evolution of a dragon devourer's profession would be greatly reduced. Using a bunch of useless information to exchange for a Grade 2 dragon crystal, Grim was almost amused by Olina's wishful thinking. It could not be helped. Ollie had spent many years in the wilderness and had little contact with the outside world. Even if she was talented and had outstanding intelligence, it was inevitable that she had low EQ and social skills. Facing this dragon devourer with the title Dragon Hunter, Grim smiled and offered his bargaining chip. Join the Crimson family and become an official magus of the Crimson family. As long as she could do this, Grim was willing to pay a rank 2 fire dragon crystal. Moreover, Ollie would be able to enjoy the same benefits as the other magi of the family. Ollie did not reject this proposal immediately like before. Instead, she thought about it for half a month. The destruction of her family and the annihilation of her race made her unable to believe in the existence of other races. However, the temptation of a complete rank 2 fire dragon was too great, so Ollie spent the past half a month in torment without sleep or rest. In the end, Ollie could not resist the urge to become stronger and agreed to Grim's conditions. Hence, without the outside world knowing, the Crimson family accepted another mysterious rank 2 dragon devourer, Ollie. In truth, Ollie's rank 2 strength was not that great. If she were to face a dragon, she would definitely be able to display the strength of a rank 2 magus. However, if she were to face a rank 2 magus instead of a dragon, Ollie would only be an elementary rank 2 female assassin. Moreover, according to the contract, Ollie refused to leave the Lance Plane. She was only willing to provide the Crimson family with the necessary support. Grim didn't insist on it. After all, the Crimson family was not facing the threat of war in the Magus world. Most of their efforts were still focused on the Lance Plane, so the goal of their cooperation was basically the same. Burning Plains, Scorching Canyon. This was a land that continued to burn. On the surface of the earth, Almost everything that could be ignited had been completely burned, leaving only fiery red rocks and 3-finger-thick flaming ashes on the ground. Thick clouds of volcanic ash floated less than 200 meters above the ground, making the entire sky seem dusky. At this moment, the sun hanging high in the sky was like a dark red fireball, silently burning with light and heat, no longer as warm as it used to be. Walking on this scorching land that could burn at any moment, even breathing in the air through one's nose and lungs was unbearably hot. An ordinary person would probably only need to stay here for half an hour before all the moisture would be sucked out by the terrifying heat waves and the ever-present stuffy heat, turning them into a cracked, scorched corpse. The only things that could survive in this land were fire-type magic beasts and elemental creatures. As for the other creatures, they had either migrated far away or become food for others. In short, there was simply no need to survive in this kind of place without Ojwa's fire resistance. Newcomers often thought that the burning plains was a forbidden zone for life, and that it was a land of death inside. However, when they barged in, they were surprised to find that even in such a harsh environment, there were still countless strange creatures living. Among them were large groups of intelligent races, such as the Black Iron Dwarves, the Flame-Maw Dragonmen, the Flamebelly Ogres and the Blackstone Clan's Orcs, as well as an innumerable number of strange magic creatures, such as the giant lava beasts, molten fire beetles, lava fire elementals, and other elemental creatures with low intelligence who only knew how to wander around the burning plains. As subordinates of the rank 2 fire dragon Bamu, the Flame-Maw Dragonmen were the undisputed rulers of this place. As for the Blackstone Clan's Orcs and the Black Iron Dwarves, they became the Flame-Maw Dragonmen's vassals, helping them rule the entire burning plains. As for the rank 2 fire dragon Bamu's lair, it was hidden deep in the Scorching Canyon. The so-called Scorching Canyon was actually a fissure in the ground in the middle of the burning plains. A long and narrow fissure had opened up in the ground here, and if you looked down from it, you could see boiling hot lava 1,000 meters below. Bamu's lair was built on a rock wall less than 100 meters away from the sea of lava at the bottom of the canyon. Under the enslavement of the dragon, the Black Iron Dwarves had lost hundreds of lives to carve out a terrifying maze with twists and turns inside. The Fire Dragon Lord's chamber was at the end of the maze. Truth be told, even the old fox Venlier sent by Grimm did everything he could to obtain a map of the Fire Dragon maze from the captured dragonmen. According to the captured dragonmen, after the entire Fire Dragon maze was built, the rank 2 Fire Dragon Lord devoured all the Black Iron Dwarves and dragonmen responsible for the construction. Within the Fire Dragon maze, Bamu had set up terrifying magic traps and sentries that were as dense as a sea of stars. This way, it was even more impossible for outsiders to covet and pry into the dragon's treasures. Unfortunately, no matter how many magic traps and killing mechanisms Bamu had set up, it was impossible to extinguish Grimm's determination and perseverance to kill the dragon and pluck its skin. However, the Crimson family's only floating ship had been destroyed in the Fane Plain, and the Crimson family had lost the ability to send the Magic Weapon Legion from afar. It was almost impossible to lead the massive Magic Equipment Legion to the burning steppes that were tens of thousands of kilometers away from the territories of 7 to 8 WYRM Overlord. That was why Grimm had long since given up on the idea of a large-scale battle and defined this dragon-slaying expedition as a plan to kill the elite Magi. The Magi participating in the battle were naturally the rank 2 main force of the Crimson family. As the leader and commander of this battle, Grimm naturally had to participate. The other Magi participating in the battle included Mary, Zacha, Tigul, Olivine, Bliss, and the 2 Blood Knights. Chapter 728. A month later, after traversing through rugged hills and mountain ranges, Grimm's group of 6 finally arrived at the legendary burning steppes. Just as they traversed a steep hill, the world in front of them suddenly changed. The sun in the sky was covered by a layer of dusky fog, and they could only vaguely see a dark red light. However, what attracted people's attention wasn't the sky and the omnipresent heat waves, but the landscape and terrain. Gazing into the distance, all they could see was the dark red earth and scarlet rocks. There were no other colors. The once magnificent mountain peaks and continuous mountain ranges had been distorted by a strange force, turning into a burning land where all life was extinguished. Cracks and lava pools of various sizes could be seen on the ground. The large-scale eruptions of the underground volcanoes had caused the rocks here to melt into lava, permanently changing the landscape and terrain. The majestic volcanoes and shattered mountains, as well as the rugged and sharp lava regions, made every visitor sigh inwardly. The destructive power of nature was actually so great. At the end of their line of sight, a huge volcanic cone was still spitting out thick black smoke and volcanic ash. Every now and then, some fiercely burning lava would fly out, dragging a long tail of black smoke as they tumbled and fell to a random place. At the foot of the volcano, there was a meandering river formed by churning lava. Along the way, they could see the figures of many strange elemental creatures playing around. Grim retracted his gaze from the distance and looked at the ground below him. His thick leather boots lightly stepped on the ground. This could no longer be called ground, as there was not even the slightest bit of moist soil to be seen. All that was left were fragmented rock fragments. Beat. Environmental inspection data completed. Air composition as follows: nitrogen 63%, oxygen 24%, carbon dioxide 12%, methane 8%, air temperature 46 degrees Celsius. The air contains large amounts of poisonous substances that will cause great harm to the human body. A host's physique is compatible with this environment. Cell activity has increased, elemental sensitivity has increased, recovery rate of spiritual force and stamina has increased slightly. Silently inspecting the AI chip statistics, Grim could not help but sigh inwardly. This was only the outer regions of the burning steppes, and the temperature was already as high as 46 degrees Celsius. If they advanced to the center of the burning steppes, the temperature there would probably be off the charts in minutes. If he was still an ordinary person, this environment alone would be enough to kill him 100 times over. Not to mention slaying the dragon, he wouldn't even be able to see the dragon's hair before he died. However, now that Grim had suddenly come to such a world, he could feel relaxed and unrestrained from the bottom of his heart. That scorching wind, that scorching heat that could make one go crazy, not only did it not threaten him, but it also made his spirit rise. The blood in his body also began to slowly move restlessly. With a soft crashing sound, the rock fragments beside Grim's feet rolled to the side. A small fire lizard about half a meter long drilled out and stared blankly at them for a long time. Then, it hurriedly ran away on all fours. Let's go. There are still over 400 li from here to the fire dragon's lair. We have to hurry. Grim quickly scanned his surroundings before leading the way towards the tall volcano in the distance. Mary, Olivia, and Bliss were all wrapped in thick black cloaks that covered all their physical features. They silently followed behind Grim into the distance. The goblin Tigu was too short, and a small portion of his long robe dragged behind him, making a hua-hua sound as he walked. Draconian Zacha's enormous body could not be concealed, so he simply threw off his cloak and wore a shiny wind spirit armor. He held a lightning spear in one hand and a frost hammer in the other, swaying as he followed at the back of the group. At this point, their previous concealment methods were no longer useful. In any case, with the strength of the small group, even if they were to face the rank 2 fire dragon head-on, they would not be the slightest bit weaker. Hence, they did not waste any effort to conceal themselves, and instead swaggered towards the majestic volcano. After all, this was the place where they had agreed to meet the old fox, Venlier. Although the burning steppes looked harsh and barren on the outside, there were still many fire and elemental creatures hiding in various places. When Grim and his team strode forward on the rustling gravel, scorching and greedy eyes were staring at them from the gaps between the dark red rocks, from the shadows of the broken lava boulders, from the thick gray clouds in the sky, and from all the dark and gloomy clouds in the sky. Instinctively, these strange creatures could sense the cold and cruel aura of Grim and his group, so they did not dare to attack recklessly. However, due to their instincts as bloodthirsty creatures, they were not willing to give up on such a rare meal. Thus, while Grim's group was moving forward slowly, they could already see groups of fire elemental creatures around them. Finally, after Grim and his group had entered the burning steps for 30 li, they met the first group of blind fellows who dared to block their way. This was a patrol team, made up of 10 beastmen from the Blackrock tribe. The Blackrock tribe was a small branch of the Great Orc bloodline. All of them had strong bodies and bulging muscles. They walked with the gait of a bear and a tiger, looking menacing. Since the burning steppes did not have any trees or crops, these orcs were wearing special leather armor made from the fur of fire elemental creatures. Moreover, their weapons were also of all kinds and varieties. There were crude stone rods, broken bone spikes from giant creatures, and of course, there were also some exaggerated and ferocious-looking giant metal hammers or maces. Each orc warrior was more than 2 meters tall and had a round waist. Their bodies were filled with muscles that were as hard as iron. It had a huge mouth full of fangs, and a strange rune pattern was painted on its face with red paint. Its huge nose ring vibrated as it panted heavily. The leader of the orcs smashed the heavy metal hammer in his hand in front of Grim and his group, blocking their way. Its ferocious eyes quickly scanned the oddly shaped party, and finally landed on the tall draconid at the back of the party. "Hey, big guy! Which lord are you serving? Why did you come to our territory?" The leader of the orcs spoke in the typical orc language. Of course, there were some strange dragon words mixed in, which made it sound very awkward. However, Grim and his group did not care. Instead, they stared at the orcs coldly through the shadows of their hoods, as if they were looking at dead people. These orcs were only at the quasi-wizard level, but each of them had the physique of a grade 1 refinement wizard. Moreover, they lived in the burning steppes all year round, so their bodies naturally formed a resistance to fire that was much stronger than the creatures of other regions. However, in front of Grim's group, their insignificant strength was not even worth mentioning. "Who's up?" Seeing a group of little fellows who weren't even quasi-wizards flaunting their prowess in front of him, Grim let out a sinister smile and privately transmitted his voice. Ollie did not move. The goblin Tigu grasped the crystal puppet amulet in front of his chest. He was still hesitating whether he should release the goblin Ripper. Draconian Zacha stepped forward. Before he could say anything, Mary had already made her move. A red shadow flashed in the field. Mary pulled down her hood, revealing her beautiful face. Her right hand, which was sticking out of her robe, was holding a huge heart that was still steaming hot. The orc leader's eyes widened. He stared in disbelief at the beating heart in Mary's hand. After a long time, he lowered his head and looked at the huge hole in his chest that was still gushing blood. It was empty and the heart was long gone. That heart was his. Before this thought could finish in his mind, the orc leader roared and threw away the weapon in his hand. His powerless body fell heavily to the ground. Mary raised the orc heart, raised her neck, and took a big gulp as if she was drinking wine. She then spat a few times and threw the heart far away. "The blood of these orcs is so smelly. Damn it!" Mary's bloody eyes flashed fiercely. "Bliss, I'll leave these guys to you," the black-robed insect shaman, Bliss, responded. He took a step forward and waved his wide robe sleeve. A large swarm of black insects swarmed out and turned into 10 sharp black arrows in the air. They shot towards each orc in the field. Seeing this, the orc warriors roared and raised their weapons, smashing the black arrows into smithereens. However, the black powder then abruptly dispersed to form balls of black insects that pounced toward the orc's face and body. Almost instantly, the 9 orc warriors and the orc leader who had fallen to the ground were completely overturned by a layer of wriggling black beetles. The orc warriors threw away their weapons and used their huge fists and fan-like palms to slap the insects on their bodies. With muffled bangs, many of the black beetles were smashed into smelly bloody paste. However, even more beetles burrowed into the orcs' bodies through their eyes, ears, mouths, and noses, as well as some of the wounds that they had bitten open. Amidst the mournful howls and roars of the orc warriors, the impenetrable black swarm swallowed them whole. Although they had seen such a scene many times, it was still difficult for them to get used to it. Killing was the nature of magi, and they did not reject it. However, making the massacre battlefield so bloody and cruel was not something that all magi could accept. This was especially true for the goblin, Tigul. He felt a wave of discomfort in his stomach and frowned. Chapter 729. Following the annihilation of the orc squad, the fire elemental magical beasts that had been patrolling the perimeter also disappeared without a trace. Although their intelligence was dim, their instincts towards danger were abnormally sharp. Once they sensed that Grimm's group was extremely dangerous, they immediately scattered and hid in their nests. Grimm and the others did not want to get entangled with these mindless creatures. After intimidating the enemies, they continued towards the foot of the volcano. With the physique of a magus, it was not difficult for them to run 100 miles in one go. Finally, at sunset, Grimm's group arrived at the foot of the tall volcano. At this point, the temperature of the air was shockingly high. The Magi had no choice but to release the elemental particles in their bodies to neutralize the overly active fire elements around them. Otherwise, even their cloaks and cloaks would not be able to withstand the shocking heat and would spontaneously combust. At the foot of the volcano, the thick sulfuric smell in the air was so piercing that it made their heads hurt. Apart from Grimm, who could easily withstand it, the others had no choice but to put up an elemental barrier to maintain the cycle of life. The Magi could still rely on their spells to protect themselves, but Dragonman Zacha and Goblin Tygol could not. Dragonman Zacha was slightly better off. His high vitality of 24 allowed him to withstand an environment 10 times harsher than the one he was currently in. Apart from being a little disgusted by the hot and humid environment, this little setback was not enough to put this Grade 2 Dragonman down. However, Goblin Tygol could not take it. Although the Goblin Ripper gave him Grade 2 combat strength, his own strength was only at the middle of Grade 1. In this environment, Magi could rely on their spells to survive, Dragonmen could rely on their super high vitality, but Tygol, a mere Grade 1 goblin, could only gasp for breath as flames spewed out of his mouth and nose. In this place, there was no way to lock in the moisture in one's body. Just the sweat alone could kill one. The part of Tygol's robe that was dragged along the scorching ground began to show signs of drying up. However, in the next moment, a barrier of flames enveloped the goblin, pushing the scorching air out of his body. Tygol immediately felt much more relaxed. After all, he had Grade 1 strength, and his vitality was much stronger than a normal person's. It was only because it lacked the necessary fire resistance that it performed so poorly. Amuro Volcano was one of the more famous active volcanoes on the Burning Plains. It was shrouded in smoke and fire all day long. Standing at the foot of the mountain, one could hear the rumbling of the surging torrents in the belly of the mountain even though they were separated by a thick layer of mountain. A terrifying stream of lava more than 10 meters wide meandered around the foot of the mountain. Wherever it passed, hundreds of lava lakes and ponds of different sizes were formed. Naturally, this place became the place with the densest concentration of fire elements. Most of these fire elementals were low-level elemental creatures with little intelligence. They just instinctively gathered in this area where the fire elementals were concentrated. They had been living here for a long time and had treated this active volcano as their home, not allowing outsiders to trespass easily. Therefore, as soon as Grim and the others approached the foot of the mountain, a dozen fire spirits jumped out of the lava pool nearby, each taller than a grown man and covered in raging flames. As soon as the fire spirit rushed out of the lava pool, it yelled at Grim and the others. However, no one present could understand this strange fire elemental language. Seeing that Grim and the others had no intention of retreating, the fire spirits raised their flaming arms angrily. Elemental fireballs smashed towards them like meteors. "You're asking for it." A fireball landed directly in front of Mary. The explosion of the fireball lifted up a corner of her robe and blew Mary's red hair back high into the air. Such a display of strength had undoubtedly enraged Mary. Another red figure flashed past. When Mary's pretty figure returned to her original place again, the group of fire spirits 30 meters away exploded into a pile of fire debris while shouting. Just a moment ago, Mary had relied on her super-high agility to pierce through the fire cores in their bodies at lightning speed, resulting in such a beautiful scene. However, just as the fire spirits exploded into fireworks, Mary suddenly screamed. She held her right hand and screamed angrily. "I'm going to kill these bastards! I'm going to kill these bastards! They scorched my newly painted nails." Hearing this, Grim sighed helplessly at the side. Although these fire spirits only had the strength of a high-level lurling, they were condensed from the purest fire elemental essence. Especially the fire cores, which were elemental flames with temperatures as high as 2,000 to 3,000 degrees. Although Mary's claws were protected by blood energy, to say that she did not have to bear any damage after piercing through more than a dozen elemental flames was simply a form of contempt for elemental creatures like the fire spirits. "Tigul, I'll leave these guys to you," Grim shouted in a low voice. "Got it." Tigul, who had been troubled by the harsh environment, finally received Grim's order. He raised his hand and released the 4-meter-tall goblin Ripper from the puppet amulet. It quickly scuttled into the cockpit and closed the protective panel. This tall magic machine warrior finally began to move its limbs with clanking sounds. The appearance of such a huge creature naturally attracted the attention of the wandering elemental creatures nearby. Unlike fire elemental creatures naturally did not have any emotions similar to humans. This included fear and retreating. When they discovered that outsiders had intruded into their homeland, they would rush out of the lava river or lava lake without any incitement or enticement. They gathered together in an aggressive manner and launched an attack on Grim's group. Fire spirits, fire crows, lava hounds, fire pythons, fire men, fire djinns, fire elemental elders. In an instant, all the fire elemental creatures recorded in the Sorcerer's Handbook seemed to have been enchanted. They all walked out of the ancient legends and began to attack the small group of sorcerers from all directions. There were many of them, and their individual strength ranged from junior lurling to advanced grade 1. They covered almost all the ranks of creatures. Their attacking methods were more or less the same. If it wasn't elemental fireballs, it was flame impact, or even magma splash. When these attacks were stacked together, let alone Tigul, even a fire wizard like Grim would find it difficult to endure. "Damn it, I've poked a hornet's nest," Grim shouted in a low voice and raised his hand to throw out the grade 2 elemental puppet. Following a deafening roar, the flame demon's 7-meter-tall body stood up at the front of the group. Its body was surrounded by flames that soared into the sky. Its entire body was filled with surging lava and scorching red lava. "Fight! Destroy!" The flame demon roared in a cruel and evil language. It strode towards the top of the volcano with its legs that were as thick as pillars of lava. The elemental fireballs shot by the fire elemental creatures continuously exploded on the flame demon's huge body, but they did not cause any damage. Only the lava fireballs or flame spears that contained some earth elemental damage could cause it some damage. This kind of compound spell could only be cast by the high-ranked fire elemental elders or fire spirits. Thus, the terrifying Balrog took large strides forward, using its massive body to attract the enemy's firepower. Meanwhile, the Goblin Ripper that Tygol controlled followed closely behind. From time to time, the thrusters on its back would spit out bright yellow flames that would suddenly accelerate into the group of fire elemental creatures, cutting down any high-level members that posed a threat on the spot. Although these fire elemental elders were not low-ranked, they did not have indestructible bodies. Hence, when the Goblin Ripper's metal chainsaws penetrated its body and cut its core, the huge body of fire would explode due to the elemental flow. It had to be said that the super magic iron alloy Grim used to create this Grade 2 magic machine warrior was really worth it. Even the lava hounds' bodies, which were as hard as iron, could not withstand the crazy cutting of the metal chainsaws, and the fire core of the elemental creatures could not withstand the metal drill. As for the self-destruction of the elemental creatures, as long as 7 or 8 high-ranked fire elemental creatures did not self-destruct at the same time, they would not be able to harm Tigul in the slightest. Faced with the chaotic situation of fireballs flying everywhere and the waves of flames sweeping everywhere, the insect wizard Billis, who only had the strength of a Grade 1, was so frightened that he dug his head into the ground. Although it was not comfortable to be underground with a temperature of 1 to 200 degrees, it was still better than being bombarded by the fire elemental creatures. Mary hid in the middle of the team. At first, she was interested in using her quick figure to kill the blind fellows that barged into her. However, after the dense fire elemental creatures turned the surroundings into a suffocating sea of fire, she could only stay by Grim's side obediently. She took out the blood-red longbow that had been abandoned for a long time and began to increase her proficiency. The tall dragonman Zacha followed closely behind Grim, shielding him from the attacks coming from behind. The elemental fireballs that flew through the air were pierced by the lightning spears, and the scorching heat waves were nothing more than a gust of hot wind to Zachary, unable to harm his sturdy body. The group killed as they charged, and in an instant, they broke through the fire elemental creatures' encirclement and rushed up the Ungoro volcano. It had to be said that the deception orb that Mary sold to Olivia was indeed miraculous. Olivia was clearly in Grim's team, but none of the fire elemental attacks were aimed at her. Hence, she leisurely followed in the middle of the team. Apart from dodging the stray bullets occasionally, she was the most relaxed and contented person in the team. When Grim and the others rushed up the volcano, the swarm of fire elemental creatures stayed at the foot of the volcano and watched them leave, but they did not rush up. Chapter 730. No matter what world it was, the best places could only be occupied by the most powerful. This rule was the same throughout the world. After stepping onto the Ungoro volcano that was densely covered in lava, Grim's group encountered a strange species the firebelly ogres. Seriously speaking, this was a type of powerful monster with high fire resistance, and could use fire spells. In addition to swift fire spells, these fire-bellied ogres also had sturdy bodies. When they wielded their lava staves and engaged in close combat, even the Blackrock tribe's beastmen would not be able to withstand their ferocious attacks. Perhaps it was because they had lived in the volcanic caves for many years, but these fire-belly ogres were all fat and strong. Their skin was dark red, and it was as hard as the lava here. What was even more annoying was that their intelligence was not low, to the point where they could tame some lava hounds and giant lava beasts as servants. Hence, when fighting against these fellows, the Magi first had to deal with the barking lava hounds, followed by the fire-belly ogres who had cast berserk spells and brandished their thick lava staves. Using spells against these fellows was too much of a waste. Hence, the Goblin Ripper that Tygol was controlling was the one who took the lead. Its body was made of Kira's magic alloy, and even after being hit by a dozen fireballs, it was not damaged at all. On the other hand, the crazily spinning drill on the Goblin Ripper's left arm and the screeching metal chainsaw on its right arm were not something that the weak bodies of the lava hounds and the flesh of the fire-belly ogres could withstand. Tygol controlled the Goblin Ripper. With the drill in its left hand and the chainsaw in its right, it nimbly flashed through the enemy's encirclement like a monkey. Accompanied by loud rumbles and ear-piercing sounds of cutting, the Magi were utterly defeated. The lava hound's body, which was made up of tiny lava rocks, was sliced into two by the chainsaw. The scorching magma stored inside gushed out, causing the scorched and broken volcanic rocks to sizzle. Based on Grimm's AI chip's visual estimation, the tough skin of the fire-belly ogre had at least A+2 defense. This also meant that without +3 sharpness or enchanted with penetration, it was impossible to hurt these fire-stomach ogres at all. Unfortunately, no matter how strong the defense was, it was still afraid of a kitchen knife. If a kitchen knife didn't work, then he would use a sledgehammer. The Goblin Ripper discovered that it was too strenuous to use its sharp weapons to kill the ogres. Even the sharp metal drill needed 2 or 3 fingers to pierce through the ogre's chest. Thus, Tygol changed his tactic. When encountering ogres, he no longer drilled them, but instead smashed them. Not to mention, the Goblin Ripper also had a mystical strength of 26 points. Coupled with its incomparably heavy metal body, it swung its weapon like a war hammer. Even with the fire-belly ogre's strength, he could not withstand it. A hammer's strike on the head could directly smash the ogre's skull into its chest. Thus, as they followed behind the Goblin Ripper, Grimm and the rest witnessed the crazy and barbaric fighting style of the fire-belly ogres. A burning path that was dyed red with blood and magma wound its way to the top of the mountain. On both sides of the path, the fire-belly ogres died horribly. With the Goblin Ripper at the front and the Dragonman Zacha at the back, Grimm's team successfully climbed halfway up Mount Ungoro. In a small cave, Grimm and the rest found a relatively clean place to set up camp. They silently waited for Old Fox Venlier to meet up with them. With Blood Master Mary around, they did not have to worry about Venlier not being able to find them. Perhaps it was because they had killed too many ogres on their way up the mountain. The top of Mount Ungoro was filled with the cries of wolves and ghosts. The furious fire-belly ogres only dared to hide in the distance and curse loudly. They did not dare to barge into the cave and fight to the death with them. In the latter half of the night, perhaps they were tired of cursing, the fire-stomach ogres dispersed angrily and ran back to their smelting caves to sleep. The night in the burning steppes was no different from the day. Although the sky had dimmed a little, it was still dark red and chaotic against the contrast of the flames and magma that burned half of the sky. After setting up some warning spell formations at the entrance of the cave, Grimm and the rest began to rest. With their strength, they would not feel tired even if they did not eat, drink, or sleep for a few days and nights. However, in this terrifying environment where danger lurked everywhere, it was best to maintain their peak condition at all times. After fighting for half the night, Tygol, who was riding the Goblin Ripper, was already exhausted. He did not have the abnormal spiritual force and vitality of a magus. Using a Grade 2 metal equipment with his Grade 1 strength was extremely taxing on his stamina and spiritual force. After keeping the Goblin Ripper back into the puppet amulet, Tygol hastily ate something and filled his stomach with water. Only then did he wrap his cloak around himself and fall asleep. Though the entrance of the cave was sealed with a flame barrier, the roiling heat waves outside could not enter. However, they were in an abnormally active volcano after all. The rumbling sounds of magma flowing underground were incessant. Every now and then, there would be a slight tremor in the mountain. To be able to smoothly fall asleep in such an environment was enough to prove just how exhausted the gnome Tigulu was today. The duty of keeping watch was naturally given to the hard-working dragonman Zacha. Grimm leaned against a rock, silently closing his eyes to rest. Here, he naturally could not enter a deep meditation. He could only rely on closing his eyes to ease his tense emotions. In this expedition to slay the dragon, he had brought along almost all the elites of his family. With such strength, he had a high chance of successfully slaying the Grade 2 fire dragon. However, the world was always so unpredictable. Any small mistake could lead to a terrifying situation. With the Crimson family's current situation, they could not afford to make any mistake. Unlike the time when the Crimson family hid underground and concealed their strength, the rise of Grimm and the Crimson family had successfully attracted the attention of many Magus families. At this time, if the main force of the family suffered heavy losses, those hungry wolves would naturally not let go of the best opportunity to attack the Crimson family. As for the enemies hidden in the shadows, they would swarm over and use the flesh and blood of the Crimson Magi to nurture and strengthen themselves. Hence, the pressure on Grimm was far greater than before. Almost every step he took had to be carefully thought out, and he had to plan a reasonable response to any situation that might arise. Just as Grimm's mind was in turmoil, the night wind outside the cave made light sounds of flapping wings. Immediately after, the alarm spell formation at the cave entrance was triggered by someone. A moment later, Old Fox Venlier and Blood Knight Soros walked in from outside, looking travel-worn. Dragonman Zacha, who had been quietly standing at the entrance, glanced at them with his sharp eyes, then turned his body to let them in. It was obvious that Venlier and Soros did not have a good time in the burning steppes these days. Apart from their weariness, there were even some burn marks on their bodies that had yet to disappear. Even with the powerful healing abilities of the vampires, they could not recover from their injuries. From this, it could be seen that the creatures here were much stronger than those in other regions. "Go and catch 2 ogres alive." Grimm gave a simple order. Dragonman Zacha hummed in acknowledgement. He raised his warhammer, grabbed his spear, and rushed out of the cave. With the density of flame-bellied ogres in Amoro Volcano, he could easily catch 1 or 2 by rushing into any cave. Hence, there was a sudden burst of battle cries and roars from the ogres not far away. After a moment, there was no more sound. At the entrance of the cave, the light suddenly dimmed. Dragonman Zacha carried a flame-bellied ogre, whose face was covered in blood, and strode into the cave, throwing them heavily in front of the few vampires. "Let's recover first," Grimm said calmly. The 2 vampires hesitated for a moment, then looked at Mary, who was lying quietly in a corner of the cave. With a slight nod of approval from her, they lay on the necks of the 2 flame-bellied ogres, gulping down the spicy blood that stung their throats. To be honest, the blood of the flame-bellied ogres did not taste good. It was not on the list of foods that the vampires consumed. The blood of the flame-bellied ogres was bitter and fishy, not as sweet and mellow as the blood of the forest elves. However, in such an environment, they had nothing to complain about. After all, recovering and preserving their lives was the most important thing. "You've been here for so long. Did you get any new information?" Grimm asked softly. As the leader of this expedition, he could not help but be concerned about such questions. After all, the last information he got was from a month ago. During this period of time, Grimm had led the dragon-slaying team in hiding, and had lost contact with Venlier and the others. Hence, he was worried that there might be new variables. "My lord, please rest assured. We've been loitering outside the fire dragon's nest, but we haven't seen it leave. In order to not have any gaps, I've arranged for a blood knight to keep an eye on it. There won't be any problems. Based on the time, the fire dragon should have recovered from its injuries in the Stoneclaw Mountains. However, these dragon lords have always been lazy and sleepy. It's not strange for them to sleep for 2 to 3 months at a time." As if he knew what the head of the family was most concerned about, the old fox Venlier opened his mouth and gave Grimm a reassuring answer. All the elites of the family had come here for a long-distance raid. If the fire dragon wasn't at home, then it would be a joke. With the current situation of the Crimson family, the absence of the main force of the family for a long period of time could easily lead to unnecessary trouble. In a situation where they didn't have any information, Grimm couldn't lead a group of elites to wait here. Hence, Grimm's uneasiness was mostly because he was worried about such an unexpected situation. Chapter 731. The fire dragon Bamu's lair was 300 miles away from Umoro volcano. To reach there, they would have to pass through the camps of the Dark Iron Dwarves and the Blackrock tribe. In the endless lava hills of the Burning Steppes, due to the lack of necessary cover, it was extremely difficult to sneak into the dragon lair without being noticed by the natives. Hence, after a short conversation with Winlear, Grimm finally decided to make a detour to the Ironstone Highlands and pass through the territory of the Dark Iron Dwarves to reach the dragon lair. They rested for the night. The next day, at daybreak, Grimm and his party set off, leaving Umoro volcano under the ferocious gazes of a large group of fire-bellied ogres. With the old fox Winlear as their guide, the party moved at a much faster pace. They first headed north, and when they could no longer see Umoro volcano, they suddenly turned northwest, following the Fire Plume Mountains. They then passed through the abyss of Lakel, passing through a terrifying nest of acra beetles, before slowly approaching the Black Iron Tower occupied by the Dark Iron Dwarves. Although the Dark Iron Dwarves had the word dwarf in their name, their appearance and personality were worlds apart from the dwarves recorded in history. They were not as gentle and kind as ordinary dwarves, nor were they as hospitable as ordinary dwarves. These fellows who lived in the Black Iron Tower, forging and refining dark iron magic gold with all their might in the scorching hot underground furnace, were also short, with a face full of beards and powerful muscles. However, they were extremely violent and cruel. They would often insert bundles of dark iron bombs into their bodies and ignite them, before charging forward in a frenzy to self-destruct. That's right, in this plane of Lance where magic ran rampant, these dark iron dwarves still persistently used dark iron bombs to mine in the mountains, constantly improving their guns and cannons. Hence, when Grimm and his party approached the Black Iron Tower that stood between two tall mountains, a dull boom rang out. Thick smoke and dust rose from the firing port in the middle of the Black Iron Tower, and a solid iron bullet the size of a watermelon blasted a piece of weathered volcanic rock 50 meters to the right of Grimm and his party into pieces, sending it flying far away. The originally vast and barren lava plains gradually narrowed here, and the road ahead was blocked by two towering cliffs. Between the two cliffs, the terrifying tower that the Dark Iron Dwarves had spent thousands of years building with underground dark iron magic gold stood there. If he wanted to pass through this canyon, he had to pass through the Black Iron Tower. If he wanted to pass through the Black Iron Tower, he would have to deal with the Dark Iron Dwarves. And with the Dark Iron Dwarves' cold and cruel personalities, the only way to deal with them was to fight. After the first shot was fired, the huge iron gate at the bottom of the Black Iron Tower slowly opened with a series of mechanical creaking sounds. Immediately after, squads of dark iron dwarves wearing iron breastplates, carrying dark iron muskets on their backs, and carrying bags rushed out in a neat formation. As they charged forward, they shouted strange slogans. Even with Grimm's voice bank, it was difficult for him to understand the mutated dwarven language. There was almost no negotiation or discussion. As soon as the dark iron dwarves rushed out of the Black Iron Tower, they opened fire fiercely. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of the old-fashioned black iron muskets rang out, and the finger-sized metal pellets hit the magic shields of the wizards, creating a loud crackling sound. Goblin Tygol had no choice but to release the Goblin Ripper again. He quickly rushed in, activated his magic equipment, and charged at the reckless dark iron dwarf. The tall dragonman Zachary rushed forward a few steps, using his huge body to protect Grimm. He bravely stood in front, raising his arms to cover his eyes, which were easily injured. As for the other parts of his body, he didn't care. After all, the dragon men had thick and tough dragon scales on their bodies. When the metal bullets hit them, they only created sparks, but they couldn't hurt him in the slightest. As for Mary, she seemed to be taking a leisurely stroll through the rain of bullets, dodging the storm of attacks. She only flicked her fingers to deflect the attacks that she couldn't dodge. Old Fox Venlier didn't have Mary's strength, so he could only scream and hide behind Soros. Blood Knight Soros was a grade 2 knight. Although he looked down on Venlier's cowardice and shamelessness, he didn't give up on him. Soros waved his long sword, constantly deflecting the metal bullets flying towards him. He then charged at the dark iron dwarf. The insect Lich Bliss didn't seem to be afraid of such pure physical attack. As he walked forward slowly, his body trembled slightly. Every tremble meant that his body was hit by a metal bullet, but he didn't seem to feel it. But he seemed to be unaware of it. When he entered a certain position, Billis suddenly opened his terrifying and ferocious insect mouth, spewing out a terrifying swarm of insects that were as dense as locusts. The swarm of insects gathered into a black cloud in the sky, quickly rushing towards the enemy. Everywhere they went, they would swarm and devour the enemy with their terrifying numbers. Everything inside the black cloud couldn't be seen, but the sound of gnawing and gnawing made one's hair stand on end. In the past few days, Bliss had already digested and absorbed the knowledge crystal left behind by Ender. Thus, he was now able to transmit the poison attribute to every individual in the swarm. Under his command, the swarm no longer relied purely on physical attacks, but instead added terrifying poison damage. However, with the weak strength of the dark iron dwarves, they probably wouldn't even have a corpse left before the poison took effect, so they didn't attract the attention of Grim and the others. As for the burdensome Olivia, she once again chose to sleepwalk on the battlefield. If she didn't take the initiative to attack the dark iron dwarves, they wouldn't attack her either. The passive effect of the Deception Pearl was still as powerful and incisive as ever. Bam Bam Bam. The strongest among the dark iron dwarves was only at the level of a high-ranked acolyte, while the rest were even weaker. If it weren't for the black iron muskets in their hands, the insect Lich Bliss alone would be enough to wipe out these weaklings. Unfortunately, just as this thought popped up in his mind, the battlefield suddenly changed. Bang! 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 A series of deafening booms rang out, and huge explosions and smoke rose into the air, forming terrifying mushroom clouds in the distance. The Goblin Ripper that had just charged into the dark iron dwarves and was slaughtering them immediately rushed out of the pillar of dust, its face covered in dirt. Seeing how it stumbled and stumbled, it seemed to have been blacked out by the sound waves of the enemy's explosions, unable to distinguish between north and south. Behind it, the insect Lich Bliss waved its ugly pincer and let out an angry, piercing hiss at the battlefield. The thunder smoke cannon had caused the swarm to suffer heavy losses, and this was enough to make Bliss' heart ache. Vicious. Truly vicious. These dark iron dwarves treated themselves as if they were their enemies, and whenever they couldn't defeat their opponents, they would ignite their muskets and charge at their enemies. Although these dark iron muskets with only 160 degrees of attack power couldn't kill Tigul, who was hiding in his thick metal shell, the violent explosions still caused him to suffer greatly. The hypertoxic insects that had been unscrupulously slaughtering the dark iron dwarves were now dying in droves, causing the insect Lich Bliss to shriek incessantly. The hypertoxic insects he had bred only had a vitality of 7 points, and could not survive such a terrifying explosion that could instantly kill a grade 1 magus. Seeing this scene, Grim couldn't help but frown. A group of dark iron dwarves that hadn't even reached grade 1 had actually intercepted them. This wasn't a good sign. Grim was enraged, and he quickly muttered an incantation. After 10 seconds of incantation, a bright yellow fireball the size of a human head floated out of his right palm. This strange fireball was obviously different from the magma fireball or witchcraft fireball that he usually cast. At first glance, such a bright and dazzling fireball did not bring the slightest bit of warmth. Instead, it gave off a strange, bone-chilling feeling. This was a cold flame magic ball that had been improved by the AI chip, and its attack method was more sinister and vicious. With a flip of his palm, Grim pressed downwards, and the cold flame magic ball silently sank into the dark red rock fragments beneath his feet. 100 meters away, the battlefield filled with smoke and blood was instantly frozen by a strange force of ice. Traces of bone-chilling cold air surged out of the ground, perfectly avoiding the swarm of insects and successfully freezing all the dark iron dwarf. In the blink of an eye, the bloody and cruel battlefield had turned into a world of ice and snow. All the dark iron dwarves were in all sorts of strange postures with sinister smiles on their faces, but they were frozen in place by a layer of ice that was 3 fingers thick. Due to the quick freezing speed, some of the metal bullets that had just been ejected from the barrel were also frozen, turning into strange human ice sculptures on the battlefield. However, this was the blazing steppes after all, and the temperature of the air and earth was shockingly high. Even a powerful spell from a Grade 2 Magus wouldn't be able to last long. With the erosion of the heat wave, the human ice sculptures quickly melted, but the shattered pieces of ice continued to burn coldly like flames. The moment the dark iron dwarves came into contact with the air, their bodies once again ignited and melted under everyone's gazes. That's right, the bodies of the dark iron dwarves melted together with the ice. With Grimm's attack, the remaining 100 or so dark iron dwarves outside the Black Iron Tower were instantly annihilated. Seeing this scene with their own eyes, the dark iron dwarves at the back finally felt fear. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.